E darò la parola a Mira Maria Danisman, consigliere del gruppo 1 del Comitè Econòmic e Sociale e rappresentante dell'associazione finlandese, ma soprattutto neoeletta portavoce delle piccole e medie imprese all'interno del Comitè Economico. Grazie Mira Maria, a te la parola.
Which mic to choose? I'm happy I have one open now here. Good afternoon, everyone, and very warm welcome from my part, also to all the participants in the room and also online. We have a lot of good program today, and also very interesting panelists, and also we have indeed quite some issues to debate today regarding the late payments. I am the spokesperson for the MSME category also in this committee, and this is a category where we are focusing on the issues that are concerning our micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, also family businesses, crafts. And late payments is one of those issues that is, of course, very important to our category as well. For those who are not very well aware or familiar with the committee and this house where we are sitting today, we are indeed the organized European civil society. So we are representing here businesses, workers, and other civil society organizations like consumers, farmers, youth organizations, and we give our advice to the European legislation from the perspective of these civil society groups. And we have a strong presence of business and especially SME organizations also here in this house, to whom this topic of today is extremely important. And before I'm giving the floor to our excellent speakers and guests today, I would like to express my sincere thank you and appreciation for the organizers of this event, Confartigianato Imprese, then we have Pimec, we have PMcM, and also a big thanks to of course, the secretariat of Group 1, the employers group that is organizing this event in cooperation with our partners here today. And also, of course, a big thanks always to the translators who do an amazing job to communicate our message from one to another. As we can already see from the line of speakers today and also the guests in the house, late payments is an issue that is indeed touching all the EU countries and the small enterprises that are operating in our member states. And it's a negative spiral in a way that causes snowball effects in supply chains. And I think it is now the high time to discuss what's the best way to tackle these issues that late payments bring. And I think this is the perfect timing also to discuss this topic in this house, because the revision of the late payment directive is indeed in the hands of the Commission at the moment. And we will be hearing also from the Commission today what they are intending to do with this piece of legislation. And I would still like to say that we are, of course, as a committee also going to take part in the process and giving our advice to the legislators when the proposal from the Commission will be published. But without further ado, I'm going to now give the floor to the next part of this event, and thank you still once more from my behalf. You are very welcome to this interesting event on late payments. Thank you.
Grazie Mira Maria e ancora complimenti. Continuiamo questa prima parte di saluti con quelli del presidente di Confartigianato Imprese, che è online perché a causa di alcuni impedimenti della Confederazione non è potuto venire qui in presenza. Dovrebbe...
Bene, grazie. Mi sentite?
Sì, e la vediamo.
Bene, grazie. Intanto buon pomeriggio a tutti. Mi scuso anzitutto per non essere lì con voi, ma purtroppo degli impegni istituzionali mi hanno trattenuto qui in Italia, a Roma. E vorrei iniziare comunque il mio saluto con un ringraziamento particolare al Comitato Econòmico e Sociale che ha accolto la nostra richiesta ad ospitare il nostro evento in questa cornice importante. In particolare vorrei ringraziare il Presidente del Gruppo 1 e il nostro consigliere dell'8. Grazie anche a Mira Maria, a cui rivolgo i miei migliori auguri per la sua recente nomina a portavoce per le PMI all'interno del Gruppo 1. È una carica di grande prestigio, che peraltro in passato, ricordo, è stata ricoperta anche da rappresentante di Confartigianato Imprese, il CESE. Infine un ringraziamento ad Anthony Cagnete e a tutta Pimec per l'ottima collaborazione fra le due organizzazioni nei vari passaggi che ci hanno oggi portato ad essere qui a parlare di un tema così fondamentale che rappresentiamo: i ritardi di pagamento verso le nostre imprese. Non è passato inosservata quindi l'affermazione di Ursula von der Leyen, la quale durante lo Stato dell'Unione 2022 ha ricordato un dato davvero eclatante: un'impresa su 4 fallisce a causa dei pagamenti morosi. E questa drammatica presa di coscienza costituisce la premessa fondamentale della revisione della direttiva sul tema. La revisione di questa direttiva, peraltro, è il motivo per cui Confartigianato Imprese e Pimec hanno deciso di organizzare questo dibattito. È importante che la voce degli artigiani e delle micro e piccole imprese si alzi in maniera chiara sulle principali preoccupazioni del presente e le aspirazioni sul futuro quadro giuridico contro le morosità. Confartigianato si batte da anni sia in sede europea sia nei confronti delle istituzioni italiane per istituire etica e correttezza nei rapporti economici fra imprenditori e con la pubblica amministrazione. Come Confartigianato Imprese già nel 2009, con la prima proposta di revisione della prima direttiva del 2000 sui ritardi di pagamento, ci siamo schierati a favore di un rafforzamento delle sanzioni contro chi paga in ritardo rispetto ai termini convenuti. Parallelamente, Confartigianato Imprese ha chiesto e chiede tuttora misure che aumentino la trasparenza dei termini medi di pagamento al fine di tutelare le imprese, soprattutto nel rapporto di filiera. Dal recepimento in Italia della Direttiva Europea sui tempi di pagamento del 2011, Confartigianato Imprese ne ha monitorato l'attuazione con un proprio osservatorio. Inoltre, nel 2013 il presidente di Confartigianato Imprese è stato nominato rapporteur per l'Italia dall'allora vicepresidente della Commissione Europea Antonio Tajani sull'applicazione della direttiva. E devo dire che in questi anni l'Italia ha fatto dei passi in avanti, ma non basta. L'attuale impianto normativo, a nostro avviso, può e deve essere migliorato. Resta ancora molto da fare sul debito pregresso e sui tempi di pagamento fra imprese, soprattutto le nostre, quelle di micro e piccole dimensioni. La situazione resta delicata anche per quanto riguarda i tempi di pagamento fra imprese private. Le recenti statistiche, infatti, non smentiscono questa tendenza tristemente negativa per il mondo che rappresentiamo. Pensate che, in base a uno studio condotto dall'Ufficio Studi di Confartigianato Imprese, ancora nel 2022 l'Italia presenta il peso più rilevante sull'economia dei debiti commerciali verso le imprese. Il confronto europeo evidenzia che il debito commerciale delle amministrazioni pubbliche in Italia è pari al 2,9% del PIL. Si tratta dell'incidenza più alta in Europa, superando nettamente l'1,7 della media europea, a 27 della Germania, l'1,4 della Francia e lo 0,9 della Spagna. Il tempo medio di pagamento si aggira intorno ai 40 giorni, quindi nettamente superiore ai limiti di 30 giorni previsti dalle norme europee, della cui revisione parliamo appunto oggi. E rispetto a questo quadro critico, le soluzioni ci sono e occorre mettere in azione, dobbiamo passare dalle parole ai fatti. Sono sicuro che nel corso della tavola rotonda emergeranno degli elementi interessanti, ma solo a titolo di esempio voglio segnalare che Confartigianato Imprese da sempre chiede l'introduzione della compensazione fra debiti della pubblica amministrazione verso le imprese e i debiti fiscali e contributivi delle imprese. Ebbene, i nostri studi dimostrano che in un anno i versamenti utilizzabili per le compensazioni ammontano a 31,2 miliardi di euro, importo che rappresenta oltre la metà dei 53 miliardi di euro di debiti della pubblica amministrazione. Qui naturalmente mi fermo, lasciando la parola agli interventi dei nostri importanti e competenti relatori. Permettetemi solo di ringraziare coloro che interverranno dopo di me, Antonella Correra della Direzione Generale Grow della Commissione Europea e l'onorevole Martina Dlabajova dell'intergruppo sulle PMI all'interno del Parlamento Europeo. Grazie per aver accolto il nostro invito che dimostra l'interesse verso il nostro punto di vista. In questa fase si sta elaborando la proposta legislativa di revisione ed è per questo fondamentale che i decisori europei prendano in dovuta considerazione la nostra posizione. Grazie, anche non da ultimo, a Intrum per aver scelto di presentare i dati del loro rapporto annuale in questa importante occasione e grazie mille anche ai relatori della tavola rotonda. Buon lavoro a tutti.
Grazie Presidente Granelli per le sue riflessioni e per i suoi spunti. Come vedete il tema dei ritardi di pagamento in Italia è e resta una priorità, ma lo vedremo sicuramente in maniera più approfondita nella tavola rotonda. Priorità che è lo stesso anche per la Spagna, per la Catalogna, e quindi darei direttamente la parola al Presidente Antoni Cañete e grazie per il suo intervento.
Grazie mille. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for coming to this meeting, especially from people abroad. This meeting is very important because in this moment the proposal for the new directive is being written. Now, let me to change into Spanish. I prefer that all the details are clear. Thanks. Molt bona tarda. Buenas tardes a todo el mundo, especialmente a los parlamentarios, expresidente Puigdemont y representantes de los diferentes ámbitos, secretaria general de SME United y representantes también de Pimec, de la plataforma contra la morosidad. La verdad es que esta jornada es una jornada muy importante por el tema que tratamos, la morosidad, y por el momento en el que tratamos en esta jornada. Como decía, se está escribiendo la Directiva Europea que debe de marcarnos el presente y sobre todo el futuro en un tema tan trascendente que puede hacer que nuestras empresas, nuestra economía y Europa sea más viable y más competitiva. Por tanto, para nosotros el trabajo que se está haciendo desde nuestra organización SME United, desde el trabajo que se está haciendo por parte de todas las organizaciones de pequeñas y medianas empresas, es absolutamente fundamental. Y hoy me gustaría mucho trasladar lo que estamos haciendo desde Pimec y sobre todo de un movimiento que se desarrolló en nuestro país desde la sociedad civil, que es una plataforma que constituimos con multitud de asociaciones territoriales y sectoriales para luchar contra la lacra que supone realmente la morosidad. Yo comentaba de que es un momento importante en tratar esta cambio de directiva europea. Y lo es porque lo que nos está pasando es que nos está subiendo la inflación de una forma alarmante. Nos está subiendo, además, los intereses bancarios. Además, después del COVID, nuestras empresas han quedado más endeudadas que estaban antes del 2020. Y, por tanto, seguramente algunas otras circunstancias que podríamos poner encima de las mesas hace que hoy en día pagar más tarde sea el método más sencillo, económico y en este caso utilizado para poder financiarte. Y esto, si no le ponemos remedio, viendo cómo van todos los indicadores y sobre todo cómo evolucionarán, será un problema que posiblemente no podremos acotar si no tratamos esta directiva con el análisis, la profundidad y la necesidad de introducir elementos que no generen confusiones. Por tanto, yo creo que es absolutamente trascendental que en esta directiva no dejemos ninguna fisura en la que se nos puedan colar decisiones o interpretaciones que puedan hacer que pase lo mismo que ha pasado con las directivas anteriores. Y, por tanto, no podemos abocar a la economía, a nuestras empresas y, sobre todo, a nuestras pequeñas y medianas empresas y autónomos a la selva de la interpretación, de la consideración o de la ambigüedad. Por tanto, estamos delante de una situación donde la historia ya nos enseña que si tenemos posiciones de dominio y tenemos ambigüedades en esta ley, vamos a estar delante de situaciones que nos van a generar unos problemas estructurales. De aquí creo que debemos de celebrar que la presidenta de la Comisión Europea, en su discurso de la Unión, después de toda una serie de situaciones que se han producido en todos los países de la Unión, pero sobre todo en los países del sur de Europa como España, ha puesto encima de la mesa este cambio legislativo, vuelvo a decir, absolutamente necesario. Creo, muy bien. No querría de alguna forma alargarme porque voy a tener una intervención en la mesa redonda y creo que voy a dar los datos suficientes como para poder poner encima de la mesa esa necesidad de que las posiciones de dominio, las ambigüedades, deben de quedar resueltas en esta propuesta que haga la Comisión Europea de la ley de la Directiva de morosidad. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Presidente Cañete. Entriamo quindi nel vivo della discussione. Come anticipato prima, l'obiettivo di questo evento è proprio quello di dare alcuni spunti in vista della pubblicazione della proposta di revisione della direttiva. Negli ultimi 10 anni le istituzioni europee hanno lavorato molto per monitorare l'attuazione della direttiva in corso e questo monitoraggio ha portato in alcuni casi anche all'apertura di alcune procedure di infrazione, il caso dell'Italia piuttosto che quello della Spagna, del Belgio o della Grecia. Ecco, ora darei la parola ad Antonella Correra, Police Officer della DG Grow, che da sempre segue il tema e che è l'esperta in assoluto di questo tema e che sicuramente potrà darci qualche spunto, probabilmente non tutte le informazioni che vorremmo, qualche spoiler sulla revisione. Grazie.
Buonasera, good afternoon everybody. Grazie Alice, thank you very much. I would like also to thank Mira for Anthony Confartigianato for the invitation today. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I will be a messenger because, as you said, the directive is being written, so I'm really all ears to listen to what will come from this debate today, but I think with Confartigianato and with Pimec we have a long-standing cooperation, and also with Intrum you have been very excellent friends in this journey to arrive at this moment. When I joined the unit 8 years ago, the SME unit here 8 years ago, this directive was almost being forgotten. So I think that we have done all together here, also I can see SME United, we have done all together a great effort to, Anthony, as you were saying, to bring this issue on the table of President von der Leyen. And I can tell you that she really meant the words that she said at the SOTEU event in September last year. And I can tell you that it's a record time if we manage to have this proposal adopted in September. This is something that doesn't happen always according to Commission time. So this shows the impetus and the interest that she has put on this proposal. So I think it was mentioned history a little bit, and I think I in keeping in line with the theme of today, so recent programs and way forward, I'd like you to take briefly to exactly 13 years ago, September of 2010, when the Parliament had reached the first reading agreement in the proposal of the current directive. I think it's useful to understand where we came from. It will be useful then, therefore, to have a better understanding of the present, where we are now, and therefore we will be able to better also appreciate what will be coming in the future. 10 years ago, the members of the European Parliament welcomed the adoption of the first reading with the following statement I would like to read to you. We have now stricter rules. As a matter of principle, invoices must be paid within 30 days with few exceptions, and this must be justified. Enterprises now have freedom of contract, but only within 60 days. Payments of more than 60 days must not be allowed, except only in those specific circumstances that have been expressly agreed by the creditor and should never pose a disadvantage to the creditor. Debtors with a strong market presence will no longer be able to impose unfair payment terms on SMEs, and this is a very good thing for the internal market. So, 13 years later, today, has the Late Payment Directive fulfilled these objectives? I would say that the picture is gray. It's certainly whiter when it comes to payments from the public sector to businesses, although very much needs to be done. But bear in mind that when the directive was adopted, the average payment period in Italy was 250 days. We have brought it down, thanks to the directive, to more or less 70 days. We have analyzed that thanks to the Late Payment Directive, the number of exit rates, so insolvencies and bankruptcies, has significantly been reduced, especially for those companies that have a direct businesses with the public administration, and also employment has been increased. But more needs to be done in the public, in payments from the public sector. I just like to mention that, for example, it's unacceptable that in Slovakia we still have the average payment period from public hospital to businesses of more than 200 days. In Belgium, the public sector is holding up more than 10 billion euros of unpaid invoices. This represents 2% of the Belgian GDP, or 20,000 jobs. So if the Belgian public sector would pay its invoices of time, could pay for additional 20,000 more jobs could be paid. Only in April this year, the Commission put forward 8 decisions on infringement procedures, either stepping up existing infringements or opening new infringements. 2 new member states have been taken to court because of violation of the Late Payment Directive. But when it comes to payment between businesses, I am regretful to say that the picture is unfortunately darker. So the expectations that the members of the European Parliament, which legitimately had the adoption of the first reading 10 to 13 years ago, unfortunately have not all fulfilled. And on this, I would like to dispel some myths. One myth says that late payment is only a problem of certain member states, of the southern member states, let's be clear. That the late payment is not a problem everywhere in Europe. Unfortunately not. Whereas late payment might not be the same across all EU member states, it is a problem for all EU member states. And without spoiling the figures that Intrum will give you later today, I just can tell you that the second member state in the EU where it takes longer to pay in business-to-business transactions is Denmark, with 61 days, followed closest by Belgium, Czech Republic, Finland, 58 days. Poland and France, 56 days, not exactly southern member states, aren't they? So these are all figures that were well above the EU average. In Denmark, the average payment duration, as I said, is 61 days, up from 45 days in 2021. It takes 70 days on average for a small SME in Denmark to chase the debtors and get paid. In Sweden, late payment is the main cause of liquidity problems for businesses, 1 out of 3. In Ireland, SMEs have written off between 10% and 25% of their turnover due to late payments. Not exactly southern member states. But yes, there are, of course, southern member states. In Portugal, less than 20% of payments in business, only 20% of payments in business-to-business transactions are on time. So the problem that we can see after 13 years of the current directive and 23 years from the first late payment directive is that unfortunately paying late is a practice that is deeply embedded in the business environment. And it's a practice that unfortunately crises make worse. Anthony was mentioning COVID, the impact of high energy prices, the impact of inflation. Inflation is basically the fertilizer of late payment because it reduces the real value of the debt. And it encourages a bad debtor to pay late because it's much easier to finance yourself on your supplier rather than having to go to the bank and ask for a loan and having to pay a high interest rate. So what we have observed then in all these years, and again, I have to refer to, I don't want to spoil your intervention intro, but you have a lot of data. So let me just quote a number of your figures. So the European Payment Report this year quotes that 37% of companies have admitted that they pay their suppliers worse than what they would normally accept from their clients, and this is an increase from the previous years. 48% of companies have replied that they had their payment terms retrospectively extended by their clients. 53% of companies find it very difficult to negotiate fair payment terms. And more importantly, I find 66% of companies have admitted that they have had to accept payment terms longer than what they're comfortable with from large companies. And this is an increase from previous years. The Observatoire des délais de paiement of France published a very interesting report with a very nice repertoire of unfair payment practices. And there is a very interesting and informative analysis of how the verification procedure is abused to artificially and intentionally extend the payment term. The same, the procedure for the acceptance of the invoice. And then other unfair practices, which I after 8 years, I didn't even know. It's basically the creativity of the bad debtor is really without limits. Is the practice of issuing one invoice for different services. Take, for example, in the construction sector, where you have a study, a feasibility study from a project, and then you have the design and implementation of that project. Between the two contracts, there can be months or even years, but the practice is to ask the company to submit one invoice for everything. So, of course, the first service will be paid much later. And as you can see here, it's not a matter of paying late. The late payment is embedded into the contract. And this is something that we have to take into account because this is, and I will return on this when this is discussion about the freedom of contract. There is also the aspect of the information that we have collected, and it's the behavior between large companies and small businesses. On average, the small businesses are better payers than larger businesses. The larger the company is, the worse the payment performance it is likely to exhibit. In Europe, 52% of SMEs pay on time, but when it comes to large businesses, it's less than 34%. And this is a typical example in Spain. In Spain, last year, it has been reported that the massive injection of liquidity completed under the coronavirus, it was passed to large companies, which, while they doubled their pre-crisis liquidity level, This liquidity was not passed on to SMEs, and they even slowed down their payment terms. Therefore, at the moment, we have 82 billion euros of unpaid invoices in Spain owed to small businesses. And here I'd like to say, is this the freedom of contract? Is this the freedom of contract that the members of the European Parliament 13 years ago were correctly and enthusiastically saying that it was an achievement, and understandably said that it was an achievement? The problem here is that if we focus on the freedom of contract, we forget what is the main issue here, is that paying late is a breach of contract. It's a breach of contract with absolutely no consequences for the debtor. What happens if the debtor is paid on time? 80% of companies do not claim interest and compensations when they're paid late, let alone they take their debtor to court, out of fear of losing their main commercial partner. If I don't pay my taxes, I will sure get a fine. This doesn't happen to a debtor. On the contrary, there are huge consequences for the creditor. Huge consequences for the creditor, huge consequences from the economic point of view. Mr. Granelli was highlighting the dramatic awareness, drammatica presa di coscienza of the 1 out of 4 businesses going bankrupt because of late payment. And recent studies from the Bank of France even speak about 40% of bankruptcies because of late payment. In Europe, companies go bankrupt because they have credits, not because they have debts, not because they made poor choices, but because they have credits. Economically, also, late payment is hampering, is the second, and this came very clearly from a Eurobarometer survey that we did before the COVID crisis, is the second most important barrier for the twin and digital transition. How do you expect that an SME can do the digital and green transition if it is not paid on time? Because when it is not paid on time, it cannot invest, it cannot recruit, it cannot pay its own taxes, it cannot pay its own suppliers. And then we wanted that it does the digital and green transition. So how can this be possible? So the problem is that freedom of contract, I agree, it's a pillar of our economic model and has to remain like that. And the revision of the late payment directive in no way is a menace to the freedom of contract. I would submit that actually it will make this freedom of contract real, because we will be giving to SMEs the power and the possibility to say no when payment terms are unfair, to take action when these payment terms negotiated are not respected, and to be able to claim interest and compensations when these are not paid. So in a way, this revision, and I will return to it, will be a way to make this freedom of contract real and effective. I was also mentioning that, I would like also to mention that, especially during our impact assessment, in addition to the economic aspects that we have so much debated, we also came across societal impacts of late payments that touch across different aspects of society. We could even draw an A to Z of these impacts. I would start with A, anxiety, C, competition, lack of competition, C, corruption, C, like lack of confidence, C, like lack of choice, C, like lack of continuity, C, problems to community, D, damaged reputation, E, lack of entrepreneurship, I, like inability, Q, like lack of quality, and W, well-being. I will address quickly all of them. In the UK, late payments negatively in a survey has indicated that late payment affects the well-being of entrepreneurs. In a survey carried out in 2020, entrepreneurs declared that late payment leads to anxiety, stress, and panic attacks in 80% of cases, making running the businesses less enjoyable and undermining the confidence of an entrepreneur. In South Africa in 2020, a research commissioned by the government indicated that late payment has negative implications for 99% of respondents. The most serious concern was inability for small business owners to support their own families. For example, paying school fees or provide food. Other consequences are strained relations with employees and damaged reputation to the market, and I figured that this would be the same consequences for our entrepreneurs. During our call for evidence, we have plenty of evidence whereby it became very clear that late payment affects the quality, the choice, and the continuity of the provision of essential goods and that are vital for our communities. For example, late payments affect the provision of public and collective transport, the provision of medicines and medical devices, information, communication, media and translation services, which are vital for living and working in the single market. Late payments affects the survival of social cooperatives, which are the ones that provide cultural goods, education, environmental services, and are the ones that also mostly deal with the integration of disabled people and marginalized people in the society. As you can see, we are touching all aspects of our lives, not only the economic aspects. It was an eye-opener, I think, for us, this call for evidence. Other aspects, a few years ago, the Italian anti-corruption agency, ANAC, had identified that late payment is basically is the fertilizer of corruption, because it leads to opaque practices. The late payment of the public administration leads to opaque practices by the public authorities, and also to unlawful and illicit practices by entrepreneurs who have to factor in the late payment and have to protect themselves against the late payment. And it is most unfortunately because it's also late payment. It's curtails competition, because, as we found out, late payment is the main cause preventing SMEs for taking part in public procurement, in public tenders. Another myth that I would like to debunk is that if we were to make our provisions on late payment more stringent, we would be hampering international competitiveness. The problem is that late payments is a worldwide problem. It's an ubiquitous problem. In 2017, 10% of the invoices issued in commercial transactions around the world that were not paid or written off was costing the global economy more than 1 trillion euros every year. Other jurisdictions, like for example Australia, the US, the UK, New Zealand, Japan, have also their own legislation on late payments, and they are rather stringent, I would submit. And they have their problems too. For example, in Australia, every year, late payments eats away at least 19 billion of Australian dollars from Australian SMEs. Late payment is responsible for 90% of bankruptcies of Australian SMEs. In the UK, in 2021, 50% of invoices issued by small businesses were paid late, costing SMEs more than £600 million every year. In the United States, on average, every SME is owed at least $300,000. And it costs every American SME at least 14 hours every week to chase debtors. In India, the legislation on SME is from 2006, and it foresees fines and even imprisonment for paying late suppliers. And the public authorities are obliged to pay their suppliers within 10 days. We have been approached by the New Zealand and Australian authorities because they think that our late payment directive is a model, and they are very much inspired by this model. So despite its imperfection, it's still a model for other legislation. And in international transactions anyway, there are ways, the market is very much aware of the problem of late payment, that the most common way of paying in international commerce is through payment in advance. Show me the money first, and then I'll send you the goods, because of the issue of late payment. So why we need, therefore, combat late payment? Because it's still a very relevant objective. Late payment, the current late payment directive has contributed, despite its imperfections, to increase employment in those sectors that are more dependent with contracts with the public authorities, at least more than 900,000 jobs, according to our estimates. If payments in business-to-business transactions would be systematically made at 30 days, the aggregated cash flow would increase by 0.9%, which is 3.7 million at sector level. 67% of businesses would improve their sustainability and green performance if they were paid faster, and 40% would expand abroad. 47% would hire more employees, and 70% would pay their own suppliers faster. So just to give you a few figures why it is important to pay on time. So now on to the revision. Why we are doing this? We have announced this very clearly in our call for evidence in January this year. Anthony, you were talking about the forest of ambiguity. And this is true, because the current directive has showed that in the practice has ambiguous provision concerning the grossly unfair concept regarding the deadlines, the unfair practices, and the deadlines for the procedures of acceptance and verification. The application of the flat fee compensation for commercial transaction, it took a Court of Justice decision to make it clear that this applies to each individual invoice and not for contracts. The asymmetry of rules for payments between public sectors and between businesses, the lack of a maximum payment term in commercial transactions between businesses, the lack of monitoring tool and enforcement tools, and also, importantly, the lack of synergies with public procurement framework. So, as we are writing the directive, what are the key objectives, the key pillars of this revision? Is to prevent late payments, but not only prevent late payments when they materialize. It's, as I was saying, the example before, prevent all those situations whereby the late payment is embedded in the contract. So prevent unfairly negotiated payment terms. And this also, in addition, providing SMEs with the necessary tools to be aware of these problems. So therefore, providing them with the necessary literacy and financial competence to deal with this issue. Foster timely payments. So putting in place the conditions to ensure that when payment terms have been agreed, that they are respected, that the interests and compensations are paid, and also rules there whereby government authorities should lead by example. And the third pillar is to empower SMEs and ensure more fairness in commercial transactions. So protect SMEs, empower them to take action where they're not paid on time, and take action without fear. So remove the fear of taking action, because most of the problem is the fear factor preventing them to take any sort of action, because they know that I've heard from some SMEs, they say, we know that it's a bad payer, but it's the only customer we have. We'd rather prefer to have bad customers than no customers at all. This is not a sustainable premises for competitiveness of our sector. So we have collected significant evidence for our revision. So we carried out an evaluation in 2015. We carried out a study on the implementation of the late payment directive business to business in 2018. There was the European Parliament resolution in 2019, was extremely informative and extremely very clear because it really lined up all the problems with the current directive. We took into account the opinion of the Fit for Future platform of 2021. There have been 2 studies of the JRC, and then additional studies that we carried out in 2022 on building a responsible payment culture. And of course, very extensive consultation with stakeholders. So I now will stop here. I will also, because I want to hear your opinions and your messages and what are your views to improve this directive. We are really here to make this. I mean, we will only have another 10 years to improve it again. I mean, it's like, those, this is the alignment of the planets. So we have to take the opportunity that the planets are aligned and we want to do it right. I learned a very nice Spanish expression, darle caña. So this is what we want to do. So thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie Antonella, grazie infinite per i molti spunti che hai sollevato, grazie per aver sottolineato come il problema dei ritardi di pagamento sia un problema mondiale, non solo nazionale o europeo, ma anche grazie per aver sottolineato come il problema dei ritardi di pagamento è un problema che ha un impatto sociale e non solo ed economico. Come sapete, una volta che verrà presentata la proposta di revisione della direttiva, inizierà l'iter legislativo, entreranno a questo punto in gioco anche il Consiglio e il Parlamento e in questo senso i 2 colegislatori sono molto interessati e molto attendono con grande interesse appunto la pubblicazione. Per questo abbiamo pensato di invitare l'onorevole Martina Dablajova, co-presidente dell'intergruppo parlamentare per le PMI al Parlamento Europeo. Purtroppo per impegni istituzionali non è presente qui oggi, ma ci ha tenuto a mandarci un videomessaggio e chiederei ad Antonio di farlo partire. Grazie.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at this important event. I am really sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I hope this video message will make up for it. Right now, I am standing in the European Parliament in Brussels. Next year, it will be 10 years since I first walked through its doors. But even before that, I have been fighting for the rights of small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe. First, I was an entrepreneur myself. Then I became the president of Regional Chamber of Commerce in my country. Later, in the European Parliament, I helped to establish the parliamentary group for small and medium-sized enterprises. And I am proud to say that in this mandate, I am co-chairing it. On top of that, within my political group, Renew Europe, I also chair the SME task force. We've got members with tons of experience in all policy sectors that matter to SMEs. Let me stop for a moment on a topic that's been on my mind for a while: late payments. It's crazy to think that today, over 60% of businesses in the EU still don't get paid on time, whether it's in business to business or business to government relationships. And you know who that hits the hardest? SMEs, of course. They often rely on timely payments just to keep their heads above water. Late payments cause so many problems, like extra administrative and financial burdens. They make it really difficult to plan for the future and even lead to bankruptcies. And let's not forget the negative impact on employment and entrepreneurship in the EU. It's a real problem. Even the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, mentioned in her State of the Union speech in 2022 that 1 in 4 bankruptcies happen because invoices don't get paid on time. That's just not acceptable. Luckily, we are on it. The Commission is currently working on the revision of the 2011 Late Payment Directive, and we have been pushing hard for it in the European Parliament. It is a much-needed reform, and we are crossing our fingers that the new rules will come into effect before the current Commission's mandate ends. Just last month, during our Renew Europe Business Days, a very successful event targeting European businesses, including SMEs, our group presented a position paper on the SME relief package. We made sure, as Renew Europe, to include our stance on the revision of the Late Payment Directive in there too. In this paper, we laid out our recommendations for the Commission in drafting the SME relief package. For example, we urge the Commission to support the widespread use of digital tools like e-invoicing and automated payment processes. They are a game changer as they bring more transparency and reliability to the table. Of course, the EU needs a strong legal framework for both business-to-business and business-to-government relations. But let's also make sure we maintain the freedom of contract. It's all about finding the right balance. I would like to thank the Commission for its work in the fight against late payments in Europe. Keep up the good work, and let's make sure that this revision is a success and gives the EU's business environment the boost it needs. I can't forget to thank Confartigianato, Grazie, Pimec, and the multi-sectorial platform against late payment for organizing this event to raise awareness of this pressing issue. I wish you an amazing debate, and I'm really looking forward to hear any conclusions or recommendations you come up with. You can count on me with the follow-up. Thank you.
Grazie onorevole Dlabajová per questo videomessaggio e per questa testimonianza, che non è solo la testimonianza di un eurodeputato, ma è anche la testimonianza di un'imprenditrice che ha vissuto da vicino e nella realtà quotidiana il tema di cui ci occupiamo oggi. Tra l'altro l'onorevole Dlabajová è stata insignita proprio nei giorni scorsi dell'onorificenza di Cavaliere dell'Ordine della Stella d'Italia, quindi la rende ancora più vicina a noi. E, detto questo, l'onorevole ci ricordava che la revisione della direttiva del 2011 è stata al centro anche del dibattito del cosiddetto SME Relief Package, un pacchetto di aiuti per le PMI che è stato voluto dalla Presidente von der Leyen durante il suo Stato dell'Unione, e su questo dossier, così come in generale sulla questione dei ritardi di pagamento, non posso non citare il grande lavoro che è stato fatto da SME United, l'Associazione Europea a cui Confartigianato e Pimec aderiscono, e che ormai da decenni è in prima linea per dare voce alle piccole e medie imprese su questo tema. Non vi sorprenderà quindi se come moderatore della tavola rotonda verso cui ci abbiamo scelto di avere Luke Hendricks, direttore per gli affari legali e le politiche di impresa di SME United, che nelle prossime settimane inizierà una nuova vita e per la quale gli auguriamo tutto il meglio. Definirlo un esperto della materia è riduttivo, è sicuramente riduttivo, quindi gli cedo subito la parola e intanto chiedo ai partecipanti alla tavola rotonda di prendere il posto sul podio, e agli altri li ringrazio. Quindi Antonio Canete resta qua, presidente, Bruno Panieri, direttore politiche economiche di Confartigianato Imprese, Fernando Signo, segretario generale di ABC, e Sanna Lempianin, sì, portatelo, grazie, consulente legale presso la Federazione delle Imprese Finlandesi, e Kate Foster, consulente senior degli affari internazionali dell'associazione britannica FSB. Grazie, e Luca, lasciate la parola.
Thank you, Luke, for your job in this way. And I more quiet after the speech of Antoniela. And I thank you, Antoniela, for their job in this way. I like to put in a picture, and I speak in Spanish to details, I say before. quiero presentarles un poco cuál ha sido la historia legislativa en nuestro país, fruto de las directivas europeas y las diferentes leyes. Y aquí tienen ustedes una realidad de cómo se implementan y lo que significa, en este caso, la implementación de directivas y leyes, como decía, en los países de la Unión. En este caso es el caso de España. En el año 2000, Europa hizo la Directiva 2000/35 que quería hacer que se pagara a 60 días. En España esa directiva no se traspuso en el plazo legal antes del 2002. Pimec denunció España a Europa y el 28 de diciembre del año 2004 hicimos la Ley de Pagos 3/2004. El 28 de diciembre es el Día de los Santos Inocentes en España. Realmente fue una gran inocentada esta ley, porque la Ley 3/2004, traspuesta de la directiva, introdujo por parte de la influencia de las grandes empresas el que esa ley se dijera que pagaba 60 días salvo pacto en contrario o acuerdo de las partes, lo que conocemos como freedom contract. La realidad que pasó en nuestro país es que en el año 2007 España era el país peor pagador de Europa después de Grecia. La fotografía que ustedes tienen ahí es la primera concentración de la historia de España delante del Congreso de los Diputados. Las pequeñas y medianas empresas y las personas autónomas hicimos una concentración porque en el 2008 una de cada 3 empresas y 1 de cada 3 puestos de trabajo que se perdían lo hacían directa o indirectamente por culpa de la morosidad. Fruto de esa movilización, en marzo del 2009, creamos en España la Plataforma Multisectorial contra la Morosidad. Posiblemente el movimiento económico y empresarial más importante que se ha hecho en democracia en nuestro país. Hoy, de los 3,5 millones de empresas, la Plataforma contra la Morosidad tiene más de 1.200.000 empresas asociadas a través de sus organizaciones. Como ven, fue fruto de la ley del 2010, la Directiva Europea, que fijó términos de pago y fijó también, en este caso, una penalización sobre los pagos de intereses. Pero lo mismo que pasó en la ley española, la Directiva Europea se olvidó no de sancionar a los morosos, los que pagan más tardes, sino de sancionar a los morrosos, aquellos que pueden pagar y utilizan su posición de dominio para pagar más tarde, financiándose a través de aquellos que normalmente son más pequeños. Por tanto, la transposición de diferentes directivas hizo, como se ve aquí en la pantalla, de que cuando vino el COVID, el Congreso de los Diputados seleccionó 20 instituciones y personas para hablar de cómo debíamos de salir reforzados del COVID. Lo que ven en la pantalla es la intervención que tuvimos, donde pusimos encima de la mesa la necesidad de tener un régimen sancionador delante de la situación que nos estábamos encontrando y nos íbamos a encontrar. Si ustedes, y pasamos a la siguiente, verán cuál es la realidad de España de empresas. España tiene 3,5 millones de empresas, de las cuales no llegamos ni a 5.000 que son grandes empresas. Ustedes ven en la pantalla el sector de la construcción. Y en la construcción, menos de 140 empresas imponen con su influencia el que realmente se vayan haciendo leyes que imposibiliten que el que paga tarde, de una forma casi voluntaria para generar beneficios a ellos, no les pase absolutamente nada. Esa es la realidad. Grandes empresas con mucha influencia que trabajan para que las leyes, la directiva y las leyes que hacemos sean poco eficaces y poco eficientes. No tenemos un observatorio en España y la plataforma hace periódicamente análisis y estudios del comportamiento de los pagos. Les voy a dar una pequeña muestra de cómo ha evolucionado los pagos en nuestro país. Si pasamos a la siguiente slide, verán que cuando vino el COVID y participamos en la Comisión de Reconstrucción de España, Europa había sacado un mecanismo de compra masiva de activos financieros que estaba inyectando liquidez a las muy grandes empresas. A través de un parlamentario de Europa, escribimos a la presidenta Lagarde para decirle que era un mecanismo muy bueno también para las pequeñas y medianas empresas. La señora Lagarde nos contestó con la carta que tienen ustedes en la pantalla, diciéndonos que ese mecanismo ayudaba a través de las grandes empresas a las pequeñas y medianas empresas. Lo que hicieron las grandes empresas con ese mecanismo de inyección de liquidez fue comprarse autocartera sus acciones, no traspasarlas, en este caso, a las acciones comerciales que hacían con las pequeñas y medianas empresas. Fruto de esta situación, nosotros, cuando la señora Lagarde nos dijo que ese mecanismo estaba ayudando a las pymes, nos fuimos al mercado continuo, a la Bolsa de España, y sacamos la siguiente gráfica. Si pasamos. Esta gráfica creo que es muy importante para que ustedes entiendan la realidad. Estos son los datos que están estimados sobre los datos reales que dan las empresas en la Bolsa Española. El año 2019, las empresas cotizadas de España tenían una liquidez del 15%. Cobraban a 63 días y pagaban, como muestra aquí en la pantalla, a 186. Más de 3 veces lo que dice la Directiva Europea. Las empresas, en este caso del IBEX, que son las que tienen ustedes también en la pantalla, cobraban a 59 días, cobraban por debajo de lo que dice Europa y pagaban a 176 días, prácticamente 3 veces lo que dice la Directiva Europea. Cuando se crea en el 2020 el mecanismo de inyección de liquidez y pasan del 15 al 30% y la presidenta del Banco de Europa dice que eso va a beneficiar a las pymes, nosotros tomamos los datos y las empresas cotizadas pasan a 66 días, prácticamente lo que dice la Directiva Europea, pero en vez de reducir los datos de pago, los plazos de pago, lo que tenemos es que aumentan, como se ven aquí, los plazos de pago por encima de lo que le aumentan los de cobro. Pero esa no es la sorpresa. La sorpresa es que tienen ustedes abajo un dato que es que las empresas cotizadas de la bolsa tienen facturas por encima de lo que dice la ley europea y lo que dice la ley española por un valor de 88.462 millones de euros. Repito, 88.000 millones de euros, más de lo que recibirá España por los fondos Next Generation. En el Congreso de los Diputados les dije a todos los partidos políticos de España que apretando un botón de que se cumpla la ley europea y española, inyectábamos liquidez por valor de 88.000 millones de euros. Fruto de nuestra intervención en el Congreso, fruto de la carta a la señora Lagarde, fruto de la denuncia que tienen ustedes en la pantalla y fruto de una conversación que tuve con la presidenta von der Leyen y el buen trabajo de la DG Grow que se hace en Europa, la presidenta von der Leyen anunció el cambio de la Directiva Europea. Decía antes que estamos delante de una oportunidad histórica, pero para hacer las cosas, como dicen en Halloween, no con truco, sino con trato. Y debemos de hacer un trato y por eso es muy importante lo que hoy ponemos encima de la mesa. Si pasamos a la siguiente, estos son los datos de España en los datos de plazos de cobro. Fíjense que la administración pública pagaba en el año 2011 a 162 días de media. Hemos conseguido reducir realmente los plazos de pago en la administración pública a 67 días, pero deberían de pagar a 30 días las administraciones, más del doble de lo que marca la Directiva Europea. Pero fíjense también lo que ha pasado en el sector privado, que prácticamente ha habido poco movimiento en los pagos. Pero el problema es que cuando vemos la media puede parecer que pagan más o menos bien, pero pasa lo de la estadística. Si algunos de ustedes se comen un pollo y yo no me como ningún pollo, la media da que me estoy comiendo medio pollo y acabo muriéndome. Es lo que pasa en la estadística de las empresas que ahora explicaré. Y un dato para pensar en Europa y cuando tomemos decisión con la directiva. Una cosa son los plazos de pago, pero detrás de los plazos de pago están los impagos. Empezamos a tener en España datos de impago como en el 2011, 2012 y 2013, más del 5%, que fue cuando cerrábamos más empresas. Pero cuando le preguntamos a las empresas en esas estadísticas, y pasamos a la siguiente slide, y veremos, le preguntamos, ¿quién te paga mal? Y nos dicen que el 55% de sus facturas que cobran mal son de las grandes empresas, el 27% de las pymes y poco más del 18% de las micro. Está claro que la posición de dominio, que no haya control y que realmente haya todos estos intereses, beneficia de una forma absoluta a esa posición de dominio. Pero además les preguntamos si cobran los intereses que dice la Directiva Europea y la ley española, y prácticamente el 80 y algo % no cobran nunca los intereses. Los que cobran son los que lo pueden solicitar a las administraciones. Pero fíjense, y la gráfica que tienen ustedes abajo es determinante. Desde el año 2010 está prohibido hacer contratos por encima de 60 días. El 61% de los contratos que se hacen en España son por encima de 60 días y nadie los controla, no pasa nada, no pasa absolutamente nada. Por tanto, la directiva y la normativa que tenemos es inocua, no sirve para nada. Continuamos abusando de las posiciones de dominio. Ir a lo que llamamos el freedom contract, al pacto de las partes, nos llevaría a la situación de pagos que habíamos tenido antes del 2010. Si pasamos a la siguiente, van a ver ustedes lo que pasó en España. Después de la participación en la Comisión de Reconstrucción, hicimos una propuesta de régimen sancionador. Sancionar a aquellos que tienen dinero público, sancionar a aquellos que tienen capacidad de pagar, porque realmente están haciendo un abuso de posición de dominio. Fíjense que el 92%, 93% de las empresas piden un régimen sancionador. Díganme un solo tema empresarial y económico que las empresas pidan régimen de sanciones. Pues la proposición de ley que hicimos en el Congreso de los Diputados, si se fijan aquí, de los 345 diputados que había, 344 dijeron sí a un régimen sancionador. Dijeron sí a un régimen sancionador y en noviembre del 2020 se tomó en consideración para aprobar una ley de sanciones a los que abusaban de esa situación. Han pasado 3 años, 92 prórrogas, se han disuelto las cámaras en España y no tenemos por segunda vez régimen sancionador. ¿Qué intereses mueven y realidad hay para que realmente algo que es tan evidente, que estamos de acuerdo y que denunciamos, no se lleve a cabo? Muy bien, esa realidad que estamos viviendo, y si pasamos a la siguiente slide, veremos algo que tampoco es menor. Cambiamos en el 2017 la ley de contratación pública, tarde y mal. Acuérdense que la directiva era del 2014. Tuvimos que denunciar otra vez a España, a Europa, porque no transponía la directiva. Esta directiva consiguió que hubiera una oficina independiente para controlar la contratación pública con los subcontratados, que son las pequeñas y medianas empresas. Hay un organismo público independiente y tienen que controlar obligatoriamente por ley que paguen los contratistas a los subcontratistas. De los 27.000, casi 28.000 contratos que hay en España, solamente ha habido control de menos de 2.000 contratos. Hacemos leyes, pero las leyes a la hora de implementarlas no somos capaces de hacerlas efectivas y por tanto vamos generando una disfunción en la que o realmente tenemos control y tenemos seguimiento de las leyes o realmente, como pasa en nuestro país, tenemos una dictadura de leyes, muchas leyes minimizadas por el incumplimiento de las mismas. Y este es un claro ejemplo. Para ir acabando, quisiera poner la siguiente porque fruto de estos cambios, Europa pidió a España que hiciera una ley para que quien cobra dinero público pueda cobrar. Y hemos hecho una ley Cree y Crece. Una ley que hemos participado de una forma directa. Una ley que es eficaz y eficiente, pero que le faltan todavía muchas cosas. Gracias a esta ley, en el que hemos aprobado un observatorio que, por cierto, no se ha llevado a cabo, cuando lo dice la ley, que en 6 meses se tenía que haber puesto en marcha, una ley que pone la facturación electrónica y, lógicamente, pedimos que las pymes, eso que es muy importante, tampoco les signifique más incrementos de costes, y una ley que dice que se debe de controlar realmente la contratación pública para que llegue realmente a toda la cadena de pagos. Pero una ley, si pasamos a la siguiente, que no contempla un régimen sancionador, que no tiene los términos, en este caso, por parte de las administraciones y que además no tiene en cuenta una cuestión que en mi país es horrible. En el año 96, los comercios hicieron una ley a su medida donde pueden pagar cuando les dé la gana, diga lo que diga la Directiva Europea, según ellos. Pues muy bien, esta ley que hemos empezado a implementar ha demostrado en nuestro país la cantidad de problemas que hay por parte de las empresas y la situación que tienen, porque no podemos repartir los fondos Next Generation, porque la gran mayoría de las grandes empresas están pagando de una forma impune a las pequeñas y medianas empresas. Por tanto, estamos delante de una situación, si pasamos a la siguiente, en la que nosotros tenemos que pedir clarísimamente de que no podemos utilizar el pacto de las partes. El pacto de las partes sería una posición de dominio que nos llevaría a una involución directamente a la situación que teníamos anteriormente. Hace 2 semanas, Business Europe hizo una jornada donde piden realmente el pacto de las partes. Creo que la Comisión Europea va a hacer una buena propuesta de directiva europea, pero los parlamentarios que están aquí y que pueda llegar esta jornada de hoy deben de ser conscientes de que por muchos lobbies e intereses que haya de unos pocos, no se pueden imponer a los intereses generales de la economía y de Europa. Y por tanto les doy la última slide, que es la que tienen en pantalla, porque podría hablar mucho rato, pero una imagen vale más que 1000 palabras. Esta es una factura de hace unos días donde a una empresa, para pagarle una factura de 2.000 euros, se le dice que se le va a pagar en más de 210 días, después de los 60 días que ha tardado en que llegue la factura. ¿Creen ustedes que puede una pequeña y mediana empresa pagar su IVA, que es el 21%, sus trabajadores, su mercancía, y poder hacer frente realmente a un pago de casi un año en una acción de prestación de servicio o realmente de haber hecho su trabajo? Creo que jornadas como la de hoy permiten no solamente dar voz a la situación que hay, sino tomar decisiones en la línea que realmente necesita nuestra economía, necesita Europa, el presente y el futuro. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Anthony. I didn't dare to stop you because it would be like stopping Rosalia to sing, and this would be also terrible. So thank you very much. I give the floor now to Bruno Palmieri, who is Director Economic Policy at Confartigianato Imprese. Bruno, you have the floor, if possible, 3 minutes.
Okay, Luke. Good afternoon. I also want to thank for the invitation, and I will do my speech in Italian. Grazie, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Cerco di parlare in italiano così ci metto la stessa passione che ci ha messo il collega Cagnete e mi riesce meglio a farlo nella mia lingua. Luke, credo che farò un solo intervento così ti semplifico il lavoro, 3 minuti, 4 minuti se me li dai, cominciando dal dire che per Confartigianato, per l'Italia, l'azione della Commissione Europea, dell'Unione Europea sul tema dei termini di pagamento è stato un lavoro molto importante. È stato un lavoro molto importante, veniva ricordato da chi mi ha preceduto tutti i passaggi che sono stati fatti nel tempo e tutti i risultati che sono stati ottenuti, ma io direi che l'aspetto che noi riteniamo più importante di tutti è aver definito, e abbiamo capito che ci sono delle debolezze, ma le direttive ci hanno consentito di definire esattamente il perimetro tra comportamento lecito e comportamento illecito. Sembra una cosa banale, ma affermare in maniera categorica che il termine lecito di pagamento è al massimo di 60 giorni, per paesi che erano abituati ad avere pagamenti, ritardi che arrivavano fino a 400 giorni, è certamente un passo molto importante, un passo in avanti dal quale noi riteniamo non si debba tornare assolutamente indietro. non lo si deve fare nelle transazioni B2B, quindi tra imprese, a maggior ragione non lo si deve fare nei confronti dei pagamenti della pubblica amministrazione. Credo che il quadro di regole comunitarie abbia riportato un'etica almeno di riferimento nelle transazioni commerciali all'interno dell'Unione, e chi parla di limitazioni alla libertà contrattuale probabilmente cerca di nascondere spesso comportamenti che vanno al di là dei comportamenti corretti, al di là della etica nelle relazioni commerciali. Questo purtroppo succede troppo spesso in danno delle micro, piccole e medie imprese. Molto spesso i dati che ci sono stati mostrati lo dimostrano. Ad essere cattivi pagatori non sono i piccoli imprenditori, sono le grandi imprese. Perché sono le grandi imprese? Ma è intuitivo, perché hanno una posizione dominante nel mercato, perché sono in grado di dettare le condizioni e le regole del gioco. Questo non è più accettabile nei termini in cui lo abbiamo fatto fino adesso. Per questo noi riteniamo molto importante l'attività di revisione che verrà fatta dell'attuale direttiva comunitaria. Poi dirò alla fine quali sono secondo noi alcune delle proposte di cui bisognerebbe tener conto, ma appunto l'invocazione importante che facciamo è che non sia questa revisione l'occasione per fare un passo indietro, deve essere l'occasione per fare un deciso passo avanti. In primo luogo sulla situazione critica che in alcuni paesi dell'Unione è particolarmente critica. L'Italia sicuramente è uno di questi paesi, però non vi stupirete se vi dico che in questa stessa sala, una decina di anni fa, nel fare un intervento, sono rimasto stupito dalla passione portata dal collega inglese che denunciava il problema dei ritardi di pagamento come uno dei principali problemi delle piccole imprese nel Regno Unito. Gli inglesi non sono più nello spazio europeo, noi abbiamo la fortuna di esserci ancora e abbiamo la fortuna di avere un legislatore europeo che su questo fronte ha fatto molto più di quello che soltanto dopo hanno fatto i legislatori nazionali. E hanno fatto forse poco rispetto al legislatore europeo. In Italia è stato fondamentale il ruolo delle istituzioni europee, per esempio, per riportare entro principi, se non di pieno rispetto della direttiva, ma certamente entro principi più sostenibili, i pagamenti della pubblica amministrazione. Avevamo veramente una situazione insopportabile, le imprese facevano da banca alla pubblica amministrazione che aveva più di una ragione per ritardare i pagamenti oltre l'anno, con veramente situazioni spesso ai limiti della decenza istituzionale. Ma il problema è anche grave nei rapporti fra imprese. Come ho detto, spesso grandi imprese non soltanto nazionali ma anche multinazionali si fanno forti della posizione dominante per imporre regole contrattuali e noi sappiamo che le direttive lasciano uno spazio importante alla libertà contrattuale, ma questo non può essere a discapito della possibilità per le imprese di negoziare regole eque, regole certe, regole accettabili. Per questo noi riteniamo che nell'esigenza di salvaguardare la libertà contrattuale, ma a determinate condizioni, questa va limitata. Va limitata nei confronti dei grossi operatori che hanno la possibilità di imporre clausole vessatorie, spesso perché contano sul fatto di poter essere o gli unici clienti di una serie di imprese o essere a monte di una filiera che può condizionare tutti quanti i fornitori in cascata. Quindi da questo punto di vista ben venga ogni regola che imponga sanzioni alla illiceità dei comportamenti, ma questo, ahimè, non basta. Spesso gli Stati non consentono una tutela dei diritti efficace nei singoli paesi. In Italia, per avere una sentenza di primo grado che accerti un illecito, spesso sono necessari anni. Arriviamo fino a 9-10 anni per ottenere una sentenza di primo grado. E quindi da questo punto di vista non basta imporre delle regole stringenti e dei comportamenti sanzionatori per i cattivi pagatori, ma forse bisogna responsabilizzare anche le istituzioni dei singoli Stati nazionali a rendere giustizia in termini accettabili per le imprese che vengono pagate in ritardo, perché c'è una grossa responsabilità delle istituzioni nazionali laddove queste istituzioni lasciano alla giungla del mercato la regolamentazione e l'assenza completa delle regole, quindi in favore delle micro e piccole imprese. Che cosa secondo noi quindi è importante fare per cercare di migliorare quello che è l'attuale quadro normativo? Luc mi fa segno di essere rapido e quindi cercherò di dirlo veramente con poche parole, ma sicuramente l'ho detto all'inizio, mantenere fermo il principio che la direttiva deve riguardare sia i rapporti B2B sia i rapporti con la pubblica amministrazione. Vanno rafforzate quindi le regole di garanzia nelle filiere complesse di fornitura, soprattutto laddove ci sono posizioni dominanti. Vanno responsabilizzati gli Stati nazionali a intervenire, eventualmente essere sanzionati laddove non consentano una giustizia certa. Per esempio, questa è una proposta che lanciamo oggi alla Commissione perché la possa esaminare, per esempio introducendo sanzioni per quegli Stati che non garantiscono soluzioni in tempi ragionevolmente accettabili, che vanno nell'ordine dei mesi e non degli anni, e con l'eventuale introito di queste sanzioni potrebbe essere finanziato un fondo di assicurazione che consenta di intervenire nelle situazioni in cui le piccole imprese si trovano a rischio di fallimento laddove ci siano dei cattivi pagatori. Questa è una regola che responsabilizza gli Stati perché, ripeto, senza delle istituzioni efficaci nessuna sanzione di nessuna direttiva sarà efficace rispetto a questo problema enorme. Altra cosa che noi chiediamo da anni, e forse una mezza parola l'ho sentita dalle parole di Antonella Correra, riguarda il principio che secondo noi è sacrosanto della introduzione della cosiddetta compensazione fra debiti e crediti fra imprese e pubblica amministrazione. Se io ho un debito nei confronti di una pubblica amministrazione, di qualunque natura esso sia, di carattere fiscale, di carattere previdenziale, di carattere amministrativo, questo debito io debbo poterlo compensare con eventuali crediti che vanto nei confronti della pubblica amministrazione. È un principio che in Italia c'era nel Regno Sabaudo e che è un principio che era un principio fondamentale delle norme di contabilità di Stato, poi è arrivata la Repubblica, non sono monarchico, ma è arrivata la Repubblica e questa norma sulla compensazione è stata cancellata dall'ordinamento nazionale italiano. Ecco, forse potrebbe esserci spazio per introdurla nell'ordinamento comunitario. Grazie.
Thank you, Bruno. Then immediately I pass the word to Fernando Sijos, who is Secretary General of EBC, the European Builders Confederation, and as he's a Belgian, you are more disciplined in keeping the time, I hope.
I will try to do so. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. Very happy to be here surrounded by so many SME representatives and people that are really attentive to what SMEs have to say. A quick word about what EBC is. The EBC is indeed the European organization representing national associations of construction crafts and SMEs. And why a sectorial panelist, you would say, because here we are a bit of a different nature. It is because, and it has been rightfully already addressed by Antonella, construction is very unique. And have very unique problems in that sense, late payment being one of those that are affecting our sector greatly. So yes, EBC has been one, just go back please to the previous, EBC has been one of the most vocal sectoral organizations on the topic of late payments. To say so that even, let's say, from the day one where the last directive was accepted, we weren't happy with it. And today, I won't go into many details in my presentation. We are going, let's say, we're asking a lot from the legislators because we really consider that both for B2B and for PA2B, we need a max 30 days for commercial transactions because the situation in construction is very critical. Why construction is such a special animal, let's put it that way. It has been confirmed recently, and the transition pathways for the construction ecosystem, which is, let's say, the roadmap that the Commission intends to put on the table for the evolution of our sector, the 95% of the companies in our sector are micro companies. If you go to the SME definition, we have 99% of SMEs in the construction sector. Then you have also the nature of our works. Construction is a very fragmented network of economic operators. We have very long construction value chain. And sometimes I'm asked, why isn't there one single construction representative, a sectoral organization? It's because of this nature of long construction value chains where you have a lot of subcontractors and often main contractors. In our case, it seems that the European agency, Eurofund, is now conducting a study of representativeness. Our network represents more than 300,000 companies, and most of those are actually subcontractors. So you see, with the nature of companies that we represent, we are actually, let's say, one of the most impacted actors, economic actors, all sectors mixed up when it regards to late payment. Okay, this is the situation. We have been vocal, but what is the situation now? It has been said many times, the late payment directive doesn't seem to work, but I'm pretty sure you have heard about all the ambition, environmental ambition that is, let's say, touching upon the construction sector. We know that the big plan is to decarbonize the European economy by 2050. The attention on the construction sector has never been so pressuring as over the last 3 to 4 years. So when you know that, because it has been mentioned, inflation has been an issue over the last years for everyone. But in construction, we had a lot of disruptions also in the supply chain of materials and production and products, which is an additional pressure. You add to that the energy pressure that we all felt. You see a lot of pressures, but also at the same time, we see the bar for environmental targets increasing. So we're asking more from construction companies to deliver on the renovation wave, a big cornerstone of the Green Deal, when at the same time they're facing a lot of pressures of the economic nature and energy nature, and even, let's put it that way, of at some point of sanitary nature. So with that, let's say, ambivalence today, construction SMEs are struggling. Our members, what they're saying, yes, we hear that construction, there is a lot of demand. The European Green Deal is interesting for you because you can renovate a lot. Yes, there is a lot of demand, but at the same time, we also have structural challenges, which you might be aware, construction has not the greatest image among the society. We miss people. And why I mention this is because we were talking about the societal challenge that late payment also represents. It's very difficult for a small micro company in construction to invest in people if you're struggling with your liquidity, with your treasury. But at the same time, this is what we're asking you. There is a lot of demand. Please be active. So yes, I won't go further into the details. I think I have many points to raise in the conversation later. But thanks again for the invitation. It's going to be a great panel.
Thank you, Fernando. And then I give the floor to Sanna Lempäläinen, legal counselor of our member organization, the Federation of Finnish Enterprises. And I think, Sanna, that you are a good example of what Antonella already mentioned, one of the myths that we have to contradict, and that is that late payment is only a problem of the southern countries. But that also you in Finland, you have quite a lot of problems with late payment.
Yes, definitely.
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Warm greetings from Finland to everybody. Thank you for having us here. I'm representing the Federation of Finnish Enterprises and representing over 115,000 micro and small and medium-sized enterprises in Finland from all across business fields. Let me introduce you shortly the situation in Finland through some results of a survey we did last October, and where we received over 1,000 replies from both our member companies and non-member companies, SMEs in Finland. Next, please. According to our survey, the 22% of the companies had experienced extension of payment periods during the past 2 years. And the companies who had especially extended their payment periods were large private companies, and especially in construction and in industry business fields. Next, please. 30% of our respondents replied that their longest payment periods are over 30 days, especially in the industry sector. And 9% replied that the payment periods are over 60 days. In over half of the cases with more than 30 days payment period, the payment period had not been agreed with the small business as it is required by the law in Finland. And this non-agreement was especially the case in trade, professional services, and other type of service businesses. Next, please. 25% of the respondents had suffered financial harm from these long payment terms. And this was especially the case in the construction sector and industry sector. And nearly half of the companies say that there should be an authority to monitor the compliance with the payment terms law in Finland. Next, please. So what do we expect as a Federation of Finnish Enterprises from the Late Payments Directive and the revision of the directive? Next, please. We support the 60 days maximum payment period with the following conditions. In some industries, it is common that the payment periods are long and they are particularly beneficial for some small businesses. For example, in seasonal trade, the small business buys seasonal products many months in advance in stock, and they pay their suppliers the moment they start to sell the stock. So in those cases, a very unconditional payment period would be a disadvantage for the small enterprise. Defining this kind of exceptions is, of course, difficult, but they have to be done in a business-oriented way. On the other hand, it must be also done in such a way that these large companies are not able to circumvent the general rule by means of exceptions. Next, please. However, the over 30 days payment period is a little bit difficult for many small businesses as they have to pay, of course, their own bills on time. Therefore, the 60-day grace period may be counterproductive for some small businesses owners who want to receive their own payments within 30 days. Despite this objective, the proposal may increase the number of payment terms exceeding 30 days in Finland. The most effective way would be to ensure that small entrepreneurs are not forced to accept the payment terms exceeding 30 days. Next, please. And we think that the most effective way to tackle the late payments is to set up an authority to enforce the payment terms law. According to our survey, the biggest problem is non-compliance. More than half of the SMEs say that they did not sign the contract by the law and are forced to accept the longer payment periods imposed by the large companies. This is possible because in practice, the small businesses are not able to currently effectively challenge the law. In practice, the supervisory authority could intervene the request of the small business and, if necessary, then impose sanctions for the non-compliance. But a very important point is that the anonymity of the small business who is reporting the non-compliance must be ensured. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanna. And then last but not least, Kate Foster from our UK member, the Federation of Small Businesses. Kate, you have the floor.
Thank you, Luke. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here because obviously we are no longer a member of the EU, but we're still a proud and committed member of SME United. And while we were an EU member, the UK was calling for a long time for a revision of the Late Payment Directive. So we're pleased to see that it's now happening. What I'll do with my 3 minutes is to share some headline findings from our most recent research into late payments among SME United FSB members, not the whole of SME United, and also to touch on some of the tools that we have in the UK to tackle late payment culture. So according to our findings of a survey of our members, late payments do remain a big problem in the UK. We found that on average throughout 2022, 52% of small businesses said that they experienced late payments in the preceding 3 months, with a quarter saying that instances of late payment had increased. So it's a widespread issue across all sectors, but the sectors across our membership that said they were most impacted were construction, manufacturing, and professional and administrative services. I have to say actually that I'm struck by some of the experiences of other SME United members around the room, because the average waiting time of January 2023 that we have of 30.5 days suddenly doesn't seem quite so bad in comparison. Nonetheless, I think the principle still stands that the impacts remain the same on the smallest business, no matter how long the payment terms are. Because as we know, late payments contribute to cash flow difficulties. We've heard about all of the issues, particularly that small businesses are more vulnerable to financial stress than their larger peers, and data from the Office of National Statistics in the UK shows that a third of micro businesses say they've got less than 3 months of cash reserves compared to 18% of larger businesses. So it's unsurprising, I think, that we also found from among our members that small businesses that said they had seen an increase in late payments were more likely to apply for credit, and that around a third of small businesses that did apply for credit last year used it to help manage their cash flow. But then we also know from speaking to our members that businesses that have experienced cash flow problems due to late payment might then face difficulties in applying for credit. So they're seen as a higher risk, so it's a sort of circular issue. So what can we do to tackle systemic poor payment culture? As I said, I wanted to touch on some of the tools we have in the UK briefly. We have a voluntary prompt payment code, which was created in 2008. The current version of that code asks signatories to commit to paying 95% of invoices from small businesses within 30 days. We also, since 2015, have a small business commissioner whose role is to provide support to SMEs and to tackle the power imbalance between small and large businesses, and they can investigate issues that are brought to them by small businesses. And we also have the duty to report process, which requires larger businesses to disclose information about their payment practices, such as average payment terms and percentage of invoices paid on time. All of these are very welcome. We've supported them at FSB, but we have found that there is sometimes a disparity between behaviour and agreed best practice. Sometimes businesses have been signed up to the prompt payment code, but publicly available data from duty to report suggests that they might have failed to comply but not been removed from the list. So there are a few things that we'd like to see to improve the UK tools. I'll just close off briefly with a word on the Late Payments Directive. Although obviously we are no longer an EU member, I think for both the UK and the EU, what matters is to see a shift in mindset. We need an ecosystem in which payment speed is seen as a priority at board level. It needs to be an indicator of how well run a business is. There needs to be accountability and transparency, because ultimately it affects more than just the smallest businesses. It affects growth among the whole economy at a time when we need it the most.
Thank you, Kate. So I think we still have roughly half an hour to have some discussions in the panel, and then I open the floor for questions of the floor. But maybe I can start immediately with you again, Kate. As you are also part of the so-called northern countries, you have now a prompt payment code. What is your real experience with it? Because also, for example, last week we participated in a debate with Business Europe, and there the Danish situation was presented by the member of Business Europe, saying there is no problem. I think that Antonella also mentioned that there is indeed a problem still in Denmark. They have also a payment code, but apparently only 25 companies and only SMEs signed this. And there the payment code only is asking that you're respecting the legislation. So what is the added value in the UK of a prompt payment code? And then also one of the arguments that will be used in the coming weeks and months by the big industry is, and Antonella also already made a reference to this, is that the impact on the international competitiveness situation of European companies. As you are outside the EU now, how do you see this issue? Is this really a problem, or will a tough European directive would be not rather be a beacon for the UK than a hinder?
I think the thing I'll say first is that good payment culture internationally benefits everybody. It benefits small businesses, but it benefits big businesses as well. It benefits the wider economy. So I think improving that across the ecosystem doesn't have a downside for anybody. In terms of our experience of the prompt payment code, the Small Business Commissioner, as I said, we've been strong supporters. I think in some cases there are limited levers that the Small Business Commissioner can pull to address late payments. So for instance, the Commissioner is only able to respond to direct inquiries from small businesses. So if you look at the Australian Small Business Ombudsman, they resolved almost 6,000 cases in 2020-21. The Small Business Commissioner responded to around 260. So what we'd like to see is more funding for the Commissioner so that they can do more in terms of being more proactive. In terms of the prompt payment code, I think there's added value there in terms of the potential name and shame element of, if you're not compliant with the code, being taken off it sends a signal. Or as I said, we would like to see more random audits to make sure that compliance is taking place.
Maybe a short additional question, because and I thought that I remember that in the time when the actual directive was presented and prepared, that the UK government promised to pay their invoices in 10 days? Because you didn't mention the payments by the public authorities. Is this a reality, or are there still problems with public authorities? And how comes that if it's 10 days, how the UK can do this?
I don't have the figures to hand, but I know that there have been some issues with public authorities as well. And actually what we've been calling for is for local authorities, for it to be mandatory for local authorities to be signatories to the prompt payment code as well, because I think that would be helpful. I should say as well, actually, that we do have a review of late payments going on in the UK at the moment that was announced by the government. So we're hoping that it will take into account some of our recommendations, but I think that there is a good level of enthusiasm and momentum among the UK government at the moment to really tackle this, so that's good to see.
But it's 10 days in principle for public authorities.
In principle, I think. I'm looking at my DBT colleague here who'll be able to nod or shake his head.
Okay, thank you. Then I turn to Sanne again, because also there, I think that it's, as I said, by introducing you, that also Finland is a good example of a country where there are still some problems. And you showed some interesting data, but for example, I saw that 3% of the companies that you interviewed were paid later than 90 days. So 3%, it can seem that it's quite little, but I think there were 1,100 or 1,200 interviews. So nevertheless, it are around 30, 40 companies who have to suffer from more than 90 days. So it's quite a lot in a country of Finland. So apart from this, you have a legislation. You mentioned also that, and this I didn't understand well, that the 60 days limit could be a problem for SMEs. Is that you are fearing that now they are paid in 30 days and that the term will increase? But maybe already on this, to give an counter argument, in any case, the member states will hopefully in the new directive can of course set their own limits. So if you have already, in any case, that is what SME proposed, that if there are already lower or stricter rules, that they can be kept.
Yes, of course. So I think in general, in Finland, the payment periods or the payment terms used are a bit shorter than in some other EU countries. We work quite a lot still with 14 days or 30 days, but we are seeing the increase or the lengthening of the payment terms. The tendency is to lengthen them. The Finnish payment terms law says specifically that the maximum payment term in business-to-business relationships is 30 days, but it can be agreed longer. And we have a little afraid or a small reservation for this 60 days period that it might in Finland lengthen the payment periods from 30 days standard to 60 days standard. But the main issue is that we need an authority to monitor that the small enterprise is not forced for any kind of payment period, but they are really agreed. And that is the solution.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. Okay. Fernando, because you did a very short not a very short, but a shorter presentation. I didn't cut you. I think that as EBC, you have also some proposals on additional measures apart from stricter payment rules. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? Because I saw, for example, that you are proposing to have, and this is a huge problem also, especially in your sector with subcontractors, if they are paid late. Elaborate a little bit on what you propose there. And then what I found a very interesting argument that you also used in order to indicate also that fighting for a good late payment directive is not only in the interest of the SMEs, but it's in fact also a more societal problem, and that ensuring a good legislation will also allow your companies to deliver for the Green Deal and also for the renovation wave. So could you elaborate a little bit on this? Because I think it are important arguments to convince maybe those who are not immediately convinced that it is a general problem.
I think that the fact that the late payment directive revision is part of something called the SME relief package is already a hint. And in our sector, in construction, that name goes really well in the sense that, yes, our companies are not economic operators acting in a void. The European economy has been suffering many challenges, as the European economy, not as subsectors. So in that sense, for us, as I was saying before, we have this situation where a lot is asked from our companies in order to deliver on the, let's say, environmental legislative vehicles that are running or that have been decided and need to be implemented. But if we don't provide them the right tools, and that's what we call the reality check, it's providing the good skills, providing a right economic and stable setting so that we can actually do the work, and dealing with late payment is part of that. Indeed, there is an issue, and all in all is a matter of consistency, of being coherent. If you ask more of a sector that wasn't that much of a focus 10 years ago when I started in NBC, now, if you need more of a specific sector, you also need to put the tools in order to help the construction, the companies that are part of construction. And now, indeed, when we know that we have 95% of micro companies in the sector, we need to find specific ways to help. And that's why we are maybe very strict in our request to some point. As I was saying, yes, the first call is indeed, let's put a 30 days maximum period of payment for all commercial transactions that they are B2B or PA2B. But something that was already mentioned that is also very important for us is to define indeed what is manifestly unfair, what is grossly unfair. So the idea is, it has been mentioned by other speakers, is that concept needs to be clarified so that it doesn't help further, let's say, find ways to circumvent certain already tricky situations. In our sector, as I'm pretty sure you're aware, this is no news for everyone. In construction, you may have a lot of disputes because of the nature of the works we're carrying. And there is this period of, let's say, verification of works, the period to ascertain the conformity also of works, that sometimes is used as well to circumvent the current LPD. So what we ask is also there to define a maximum of 30 days calendar to ascertain the conformity of services or goods from day one where the services are finished or the goods are delivered. Then the question about the direct possibilities to help subcontractors to claim for their works. We do a clear link with the Public Procurement Directive, because in the Public Procurement Directive, there is one provision that allows subcontractors to directly claim payments from public authorities in certain situations where the main contractor is not respecting the contractual framework. Why don't we apply that to the late payment directive as well? Because those two are tools that are quite complementary. But then other solutions that we also put on the table that are on the screen were already mentioned. Indeed, the offset of taxes, social security for certain services that have been provided and have not been paid rightfully, should be considered, as well as reinforcement of the transparency on payment practices, the enforcement part. Something that hasn't been mentioned yet and that we consider interesting as long as it is, let's say, set up in a fair way, because we talked about the imbalance of power, which is a true, real reality in construction, is about the tools that are mediation tools, arbitration tools. As it was said before, you have this tendency where small companies do not feel at ease at all to complain about one economic operator because they feel to lose a client. Same goes to mediation and arbitration. It depends on the setting. If you face a mediation jury that is not fair because of the nature of the people that compose that body, you also face you increase the imbalance of power, and that's why we consider it a relevant tool, but depending on how it is set up.
Okay, thank you. On the other hand, I think mediation only works if there is a conflict on a different view on the issue of late payment. I mean, it's there, it's late payment or not. And then another point you mentioned, Fernando, is the issue that unfair terms should be defined clearly in the directive. I hope, and then I put on the head of SME United, that this term will completely disappear, because it only appeared in the article concerning the grossly unfair terms, which is the reason why there are still longer payment terms. So we hope in any case that this term unfair will disappear from the directive. Having said this, Bruno, I have a very short question for you. No, two, in fact, because I mentioned, and maybe it was a mistake on the slide. I saw in your presentation that you mentioned that late payment in public authorities is unintentional, so that I cannot believe that the Italian authorities are paying late unintentional. I think that they do it deliberately, that they are paying late and waiting to pay. And then secondly, you also mentioned that there is often a request to delay the sending of the invoice. The introduction of e-invoicing in Italy, which I think is already a reality, has this helped to fight late payment?
Allora, in parte quando parlo di non volontarietà mi riferisco a tutte quelle regole che sovraintendono l'attività della pubblica amministrazione e che rendono di fatto impossibile rispettare il termine. Ne abbiamo diverse. La principale fra tutte è che spesso le pubbliche amministrazioni si trovano in mancanza di liquidità, ovvero non hanno le risorse liquide per poter far fronte ai pagamenti, perché queste non gli sono state girate dall'amministrazione a monte. Quindi questo è un caso molto frequente. Ci sono ritardi tra gli impegni di spesa e la effettiva disponibilità di cassa. E questo dipende da procedure complesse. Spesso, lo diceva Fernando, dal momento in cui un'opera è finita o un servizio è erogato al momento in cui l'amministrazione può pagare, c'è tutta una fase procedurale di controllo, di collaudo. Beh, lui diceva facciamola in 30 giorni, io dico magari 30 giorni per la pubblica amministrazione italiana, fare una procedura di collaudo sarebbe veramente la rivoluzione. E questo è un altro elemento che più di tanto non si può comprimere stanti le attuali procedure. Poi spesso proprio le regole di contabilità sono regole complesse, regole che prevedono molti passaggi di controllo da parte di authority di controllo, e questo allunga i termini in cui una pubblica amministrazione può pagare. Magari vuol pagare, io penso al piccolo comune che ha il rapporto col piccolo imprenditore locale dove il sindaco tutti i giorni lo incontra e ci mette la faccia e magari gli deve dire: non ti posso pagare perché non sono nella condizione di poterlo fare, perché non ho dietro di me la possibilità di farlo. L'ultimo aspetto al quale tu citavi, che è un aspetto odioso che accade nelle pubbliche amministrazioni italiane, è che spesso per far fronte a questa impossibilità di pagare, la pubblica amministrazione chiede all'impresa: non fatturare, aspetta a fatturare, fatturami quando avrò i soldi e quando sarò nella condizione di pagarti. E l'impresa non può far altro, se vuole continuare a lavorare con quella pubblica amministrazione, che attendere e non fatturare.
Okay, thank you. By the way, it's not only the case in Italy. Apparently in Denmark also, you are only allowed twice a year to send your invoices to the public authorities. I'm coming to you, Anthony. Very short question on this vote in the Spanish Parliament on to introduce, or when the Parliament voted in favor of procedure for a sanctioning scheme. So there was, I think, everybody voted in favor. Nevertheless, it's not there. What is the reason for this?
Good question. What is the reason? Luque me pregunta, que había comentado anteriormente, que entramos en noviembre del año 2020, aprobado por la mayoría del Congreso de los Diputados. Ninguna ley en España, en la legislación que ha acabado, se había aprobado para llevarla a cabo con la mayoría de todos los grupos parlamentarios. La proposición de tener un régimen sancionador en España en noviembre del 2020 se aprueba con unanimidad, una única abstención que había puesto anteriormente en mi presentación. Han pasado prácticamente 3 años y ha habido 92 prórrogas sistemáticas cada vez en el Congreso de los Diputados para no llevar a cabo la ley de sanciones a aquellos que abusan de la posición. ¿Por qué? Porque, como he explicado anteriormente, muy pocas empresas tienen una fuerza que mandan por encima de lo que son las pequeñas y medianas empresas. 99,8% de las empresas en España son pymes, 75% del empleo y 63% del Producto Interior Bruto. Pero en España, las pymes no tenemos voz propia. No existe en el diálogo social una voz que represente a las pequeñas y medianas empresas propia. Están dentro de otra organización que realmente representa los intereses de todo el empresariado de España, que es la COE. La COE representa a todas las empresas en España, pero cuando tenemos que representar a las pequeñas y medianas empresas, la COE tiene una marca que se llama CPyme, que representa a la pequeña y mediana empresa. Por eso, el Consejo de Europa acaba de aprobar hace 2 semanas todo lo que ha sido la recomendación de la Comisión Europea en el diálogo social, donde dice algo en el siglo XXI de que se deben de crear mecanismos de representación y participación democráticos, en este caso transparentes y con participación. Si las pymes no estamos donde se toman las decisiones siendo el motor de la economía, cambiar leyes en algunos ámbitos es muy complicado, como se demuestra con la pregunta que me acabas de hacer, Luke. Es la segunda vez en España que estamos a punto de meter un gol en la portería sin portero y cuando la pelota va a cruzar la portería nos quitan la portería. Por tanto, Europa se convierte en realmente la necesidad de crear un marco legislativo transparente y que pueda permitir que se hagan leyes que sean justas. Las grandes empresas están defendiendo sus intereses y eso es lícito, pero no es justo. Y por tanto debemos de tener justicia a la hora de trabajar en la economía, porque si no se nos van a derivar unas realidades, como se están derivando, en las que vamos a perder competitividad y viabilidad. Cuando yo comparo una empresa española con una empresa francesa, la española cobra a 160 días y la francesa cobra 40 y son iguales, de 10 millones de facturación, la empresa francesa necesita poco más de 1 millón de euros para financiar su circulante, su espacio de pago, cuando la española necesita más de 5 millones. Que te dé un banco el 50% de tu facturación ya es algo muy importante en circulante, no en inversión. Pero si te da esa cantidad, tienes que pagar los intereses. Por tanto, ¿qué empresa es más viable? ¿La que pide 1 millón o 5 millones de circulante? ¿Qué empresa es más competitiva? La que en su última línea de resultados tiene que poner además los costes de la mitad de su facturación por financiarse porque no le paga, en este caso, su cliente. Por tanto...
Vale. I have still some minutes for some questions from the floor, I think. No? Okay. Are there questions? There, wait. Who was first? Oh. You were first. Maybe if you can present yourself quickly.
Yeah. So I'm Nikolai from the Department of Business and Trade in the UK. I just wanted to clarify and answer some of the questions. I don't know what provisions were made some years ago in the implementation of the directive, but currently the requirement is for 30 days for UK.
Can you speak a little bit louder, please?
Yeah. I think there are about 3,500 signatories of the Prompt Payment Code at the moment, and there are also 6,000 large companies reporting payment data, of which around 600 are signatories of the code. Around 3/4 of signatories pay 95% of invoices within 60 days, compared to only about 40% of non-signatories. So you can see there is some sort of difference in behavior, at least. And it's even more, it's about 90% of signatories pay within 60 days. So pay 90% of invoices within 60 days, so there is some change. And I think on an anecdotal level as well, there are certain companies where being threatened by with removal from the Prompt Payment Code has driven an improvement in culture. For example, in British American Tobacco, after they were threatened with removal, they halved payment times in 2 years. But this is partly driven by a particularly passionate CFO. And I think this is a problem with a lot of large companies, that it relies on 1 or 2 responsible individuals within a company to drive serious change, and that's often not long lasting. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, now, my name is Enrique Sáez. En español mejor. Estoy en la Junta Directiva de la Plataforma contra la Morosidad y más que nada quisiera insistir en que, estando dentro de las instituciones europeas, en que el pagar mal es un problema también de competitividad, ¿no? Nos preocupa la situación de Europa, su dinamismo, su capacidad de adaptarse a la situación actual. En cierta medida, que las empresas grandes paguen mal es una forma de defenderse. Evita que haya renovación. Porque muchas pequeñas y medianas empresas están atrapadas en financiar el capital circulante. Entonces no pueden invertir, no pueden crecer, no pueden investigar. Para mí desde luego en el caso de España es un caso extremo, ¿no? Pero hay que pensar en términos generales. Es un problema estructural. Es decir, si no conseguimos una renovación, hace falta renovar sistemáticamente el tejido empresarial con nuevas aportaciones. Es lo que todos buscamos. Y el mecanismo de secuestrar el capital de los pequeños en el circulante es un mecanismo de defensa de los grandes.
Thank you. Any other question?
Te explico con firme.
But then maybe in order to stay in time, maybe we can conclude here this panel discussion, and then maybe in any case to call all of you in the coming months to certainly use the data that also the Commission has presented in the discussions that you will or hopefully will have with parliamentarians, because it's quite important. Antonella mentioned what the Parliament has said after the first reading in 2010. All those principles, and also the principles that now are in our position of SME United on setting clear caps and so on. In fact, all the principles that we are defending, they are already in the Directive of 2011 in the recitals. If you read it, everything is in it. The only problem is that in the time when there was the discussion in the Parliament, and once again, the Parliament in the time had improved the proposal of the Commission, that the principles who are in the recitals, the clear principles, paying 30 days, maximum verification period of 30 days, and so on, they are in the recitals of the actual directive. So you have to be very careful that in the Parliament, those recitals are not watered down in order to have a positive outcome of the discussion in the Parliament and also in the Council. And also on the arguments used by larger companies, international competition, or the argument that SMEs have also always the possibilities to refuse a contract. I think with the data that we have, with the data that the Commission has provided, and also we will see also now in the presentation of Intrum, that we can certainly motivate for a very stringent new legislation on late payment. And as already has been said, it's a once in a decade possibility to achieve this. So I think I can now give the floor to Marte Gran-Christoffersen of Intrum to do the presentation of the European Payment Report 2023. Or are you doing this? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Luke. So now the speakers of the round table can join their places, initial places, and the speaker from Intrum can join us here. Thank you all the speakers for their good overviews of the situation in their countries. And now we'll give the floor to Marte Gran-Christoffersen from Intrum. So I have the pleasure to take over from now on for the final part of our event, and I have the pleasure to introduce the speaker of our next session, Marte Gran-Christoffersen. She comes from Intrum. Intrum is the industry-leading provider of credit management services with a presence in 24 markets in Europe. Intrum helps companies to get paid, and also in 2022 supported more than 4 million people become debt-free. So Marte has been working for 10 years in the financial sector in communications and brand marketing. And she has, in the past 5 years, led the research projects of the publications of the European Payment Report and the European Consumer Payment Report. Today, she will introduce the findings of the 2023 edition of the European Payment Report. So, Marte, welcome to our event, and you have the floor. Thank you. Should I put on the mic? Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation to this event. It's truly been super interesting to hear all the reflections and discussion for the past hours. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present the findings from the European Payment Report 2023. I think all of us in this room can agree that late payment is indeed a huge problem for businesses of all sizes across Europe. And we see that daily in supporting more than 80,000 clients across Europe in getting paid for services and goods they have sold. A lot of statistics has been shared today, and this is the last session. So I think Antonella brought some highlights from the European Payment Report, which we're thrilled about. But I'll try to bring a little bit more holistic perspective to the late payment problem across Europe. And hopefully you will get some new insights on that topic today to go along with the great discussions we've seen so far. So if you put the next slide, please. Just a few keynotes on Intrum and who we are, because what we do every day is to lead the way to sound economy. That means that we help companies to flourish and invest and grow by getting paid on services and goods they have sold. We help businesses and consumers to get debt-free and to come back to a life where they can continue to buy and make the wheel of economy go round. Our employees, by solving cases and helping people out of debt every day, also feel that they can make a difference. And in a well-functioning society where credit flourishes and the economy is boosted by payments, businesses can continue to employ, invest, and grow. So that is what we do every day. And in the next slide, we also have listed some of the key elements where we share our unique insights about late payments. And we do that across different reports that we publish on an annual basis. Today, we will focus specifically on the European Payment Report, which describes how the late payments impact growth and development among businesses of all sizes across 29 markets. We also have a lot of insights from the consumer perspective in the European Consumer Payment Report, and we also deep dive into the specific data across various sectors in white papers, and also our own senior economist, Anna Subrawska, also share her reflections on the macroeconomic situations coming from a late payment directive. So as Antonella mentioned, we do indeed have a great and rich data set, and I will not use the time today to go through all of that. We have a number of data points provided in the reports, but we would be happy to also discuss it separately with you if there's topics that you're interested in from your country, for your sector that you're representing, or any other dimensions that we can bring knowledge to. When it comes to the European Payment Report, which we often refer to as the EPR, that's based on an external survey that we do across 29 European markets in Europe. We have been publishing this report since 1998, so it has a great legacy of providing insights to late and non-payment and how that impacts businesses across the continent. This year, we had more than 10,556 companies participating, and we conducted the fieldwork between November 2022 and March 2023. If you go to the next slide, a little bit about the respondents to set the scene for the insights you will see today.
The target audience for the survey is CFOs and other C-level executives that have insights on the financial knowledge of the company that they work for. We have a good split between SMEs and large corporations in all the markets where we did the survey. And we also, as you can see on the graph on the right side here, a good representation also from 15 sectors and industries across Europe. So that is just a little bit on the backbone. And if you take the next slide, please. As mentioned, the report is very broad and we have great and rich data set, but the main key findings this year revolves around the economical challenges that businesses are currently facing. It's already been mentioned by inflation, increased interest rates, and other macroeconomic challenges. But overall, we see that the inflationary pressures continue to squeeze European companies. And the persistently high inflation hits revenues, making companies focusing on cost cutting and postponing growth. And that is a problem post-COVID, when everyone has felt and seen the challenges that specifically small business have faced, specifically in restaurant, hospitality, and travel industries. So that this continues to be a problem will continue to impact businesses in Europe. In the next slide, you can see that companies expect revenue disruption as customers struggle to continue to face the economic turbulence. Close to 6 in 10 expects that the high inflation will impact customers' ability to pay on time and in full. On the graph on the right side here, you can see the split between the different markets that we surveyed in Europe. And though the European average is on 59, you can see a number of countries well positioned over that, with Estonia having the most negative outlook on customers' ability to stay on top of their bills. Rising inflation and interest rates, those are the two interconnected aspects, are putting severe pressure on European customers. The cost of living has just increased, and we see that also on the backbone of the energy crisis, as mentioned, with the interest rates, especially in countries where we have high debt ratio among customers, but also among businesses in certain sectors that rely on credit to fund their business. And when we look at the split between the company sizes, we see that there is a slight increase in the SMEs. 61% say that the rising inflation has a high impact on their customers' ability to pay on time, compared to 57%. So there is a very small notable difference in that sense. We also have another interesting point coming from the report, and that is that we asked the respondents if they see a risk of late and non-payments from their clients and customers. Obviously, these are based on businesses that both sell B2B and B2C, and if they see that developing for the next year to come. And here also we see that 61% of SMEs sees that their risk of late payment is increasing. This is also something that we have seen developing over the past years post-COVID. The squeeze for businesses is also coming from within. Almost 9 in 10, 85% across Europe of the respondents say that their employees are pushing for larger than usual pay rises, or are likely to do so in the near future. Here, UK and Finland is ranking on top with 91% respectively. Looking at the size of the companies, SMEs rank also higher than large companies, with 86% of the companies saying that they expect their employees to ask for higher wages. So the businesses are indeed in a difficult challenge at the moment, having external factors with the macroeconomic factors impacting the business and their customers in order to get paid, but also internal challenges with employees asking for more payment and wage. If you go to the next slide, please. We also see that longer payment terms are a rising concern, and I think we have had several of the keynote speakers today sharing light on that perspective. Yet we see also that companies are not walking the talk, and they also pay their own suppliers unacceptably late. Next slide, please. We see that companies are increasingly forced to accept longer payment terms. This was also mentioned earlier today, with 66% of companies being pressured by large and multinational corporations to accept longer payment terms than they are comfortable with. And this is an increasing trend, as you can see from the graph on the right side, coming up from 54% in 2021 and 61% in 2022. And as cash flows are squeezed, we also see a late payments loop emerge. So if a business is struggling to get its customers to pay, they may also need to hold the payment of their own suppliers in order to stay floating. And this is potentially then leading to a supply chain disruption and also a less resilient European economy. And also here you can see that 37% of companies admit that they are paying their suppliers later than they would accept for their own customers. This is unfortunately also a trend we see increasing, coming from 29% in 2021. To go along with this, I also wanted to mention another data point in this topic. We asked the respondents, in today's business environment, we are finding it increasingly difficult to agree on payment terms that are fair for us as well as our clients and customers. And 55% SMEs agreed to this statement. So it is indeed challenging to find fair payment terms that works for everyone involved. And I think we've seen a number of discussion points on that also today. Next slide, please. Mentioning also coming back on the backbone of the COVID, the safety net has certainly been taken down. Many industries faced great challenges when having to close down during the COVID, and they also seen an increase in state support. But after the pandemic, we also see that as this support has been withdrawn, more and more companies have sought to address their cash flow issues by paying their suppliers later than agreed. So on the graph here, you can also see this split between the countries in where corporate customers take the longest to make payments. We already mentioned, and I think also our data is quite consistent to the other data points that has been shown today, with an average payment time from corporates being 56 days across Europe. But here you can also see the split based on the markets. And also Denmark was mentioned here as a problem country, even though located in the Nordics and the Scandinavia, which has previously been viewed as a more sound economy when it comes to fair payment terms. We also mentioned a little bit about the public sector today. Our data show that on average 69 days is taken by the public and government administration to pay companies. The top 5 market is Lithuania, Bulgaria with 76 days, Norway and Norwegian companies reporting 74 days, and UK and Belgium 73. So the public sector also have some way to go in order to be sound and fair payment payers. On average, it's quite equal between SMEs and large corporations. So in this data point, it doesn't indicate that there is a large difference on what government choose to pay or not. It's quite equal between SMEs and large companies. Next slide, please. So where does that take us and where does this lead up to? We see that late payments are a growing time suck. We did some calculations and the number was quite astonishing, where we ended up having a 275 billion euro payment problem. Paying on time creates a positive ripple effect, both for the company and the economy at large, but we're not there yet. In the next slide, you can see the question that we asked all the respondents on the right side. To your best estimate, how many hours on average does your business spend each week in chasing client and customers for payment, such as sending reminders, making phone calls, etc.? You can see the split here. On average, it took about 2.5 hours on a week on European average. That calculates to 74 days on average a business spend in a year chasing late payments. If we then do the math of the cost of salaries across the 30 million companies across Europe, assuming that they have an average pay of 17 euro an hour, we then arrive at a rough figure of 275 billion euro. That equals the amount of the GDP of Finland or Portugal. Imagine what that sum could do for small businesses or large businesses to invest for the green shift, for innovating, for staying afloat, employing more people. It's quite astonishing. And that is the cost of late payment. And then you add up what actually is unpaid claims or bad debts. It was mentioned, I believe, 12 million or something. It's quite a large number to add on that as well. So this is indeed the effects that we also see in helping companies every day in collecting on payments that they have already produced services and goods for. So in the next slide, obviously Antonella mentioned that we do have a number of data points in the survey containing information about the late payment directive, about code of ethics, and what businesses do to try to prevent this. Because I think when we start putting a face or a name or knowing entrepreneurs that have started up following their dream just to be shut down because they cannot get paid for what they actually get help with, this is something that we at Intrum also believe is important to share the light on and put the spotlight on. So we have over the years had a number of questions relating to the late payment directive and how that is implemented across businesses and across countries. We see positively that more and more companies are using the European late payment directives. On the right slide here, you can see the countries that are reporting that they are exercising the right to charge interest and recovery costs. There is a slight difference between the countries at top, but there is also a large difference in the member states who have adopted and used these rights when they experience late payments. However, we also see that a majority thinks that the late payment directive could be tougher. When it comes to the question that we also asked in the survey, we asked what would make you exercise the right provided by the European late payment directive more frequently than you do currently. And 53% say that the review of existing rules would support in that. And also Belgium and Switzerland reported to be on top with 61% saying reviewing existing rules would be beneficial. A new alternative that we introduced this year, as we also know that the revision was coming up in 2023, was an alternative where we asked them if a fixed cap for payment terms of the directive would be interesting, and 10% agreed to that. So not a large amount of companies when it comes to the amount of time for fixed cap on payment days. So that also is quite interesting. We have all of these data points in our reports, which you can download on intrum.com. But at least I wanted to round up with some simple statistics when it also comes to code of conduct on prompt payments that go hand in hand also with the late payment directives. And we do see that the growth of trend of late payment is unfortunately understandable given the macroeconomic situation and what we've been through since 2020. Businesses are experiencing inflation, higher interest rates, and all sorts of macroeconomic factors that impact their cash flow. And they also have a number of challenges, internal and external, to struggle to fund their expenses. But nevertheless, we think that it would be beneficial if and also in everyone's interest to encourage a prompt payment culture across Europe. And that culture would also require a stronger bond between the payer and the payee, especially in the B2B transactions where you also have a contract in place and also a corporate relationship with your supplier or partner. So we also see in our research, which is quite interesting, and that is the correlation between businesses that pay on time and those that have put a code of ethics in place internally in their company. When a business makes a public commitment to paying suppliers on time, they are also more likely to do so. Just 1 in 3 say that they pay customers late or ask for longer payment terms compared to 40% of those without the code. So it actually matters. It makes a difference if you're externally showcasing that you have a code in place and you're following up on that. So to conclude, I think that securing a stable and well-functioning value chain in the financial sector is critical in this regard, as liquidity crunches are the main reason for many companies' current struggles and also even bankruptcies. It is difficult to determine how this will evolve and how this will develop going forward. But I think based on the insights from our study and also the discussions that have taken place today, that late payment is indeed a challenge that we all need to face and also meet and do something about. Thank you.
Thank you, Marte, for presenting this interesting data. Indeed, the total annual cost is astonishing, as you said, and the data are, I think, presented today for the first time in Brussels on the 2023 report. So it's a pleasure to count on your presentation here in our event. So a warm thank you from all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I would welcome our last speakers for the session, for our afternoon session. Mr. Veronique Williams and Mr. Pietro Delotto can come to the table here. So, thank you.
Very interesting. We have a relationship with your company. Yes. I use always the dates, the figures.
President, you
No, come on. Second, please. You're from there.
So on this last part, I am honored to present 2 accomplished professionals known for defending the interest of SMEs in the EU. So Mr. Pietro Delotto and Ms. Veronique Williams. Ms. Veronique Williams is the Secretary General of SME United. SME United is the European Association of Crafts as SMEs. Ms. Williams has been Secretary General since 2017, and she's well known in Brussels for her advocacy of SMEs in the European institutions and advocating for late payments, the SME relief package, among many, many other European files. So we are honored, Veronique, to have you here with us, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Rosa, and also thank you to Confartigianato and Pimec for organizing this event, which I think is very timely. The hot topic has been going around the Brussels bubble for quite some months now already. I'm happy that I can conclude after such an interesting exchange, a lot of figures who have all been demonstrating what I also raised last week at the OECD SME Ministerial, where we discussed the topic of access to finance for SMEs. And whereas the past few years we have tackled this issue, especially from a point of fairness in contracts and honoring contract terms between businesses and government, public authorities, and business-to-business deals. We have been taking also another approach since the GRC study clearly showed the impact of payment terms on cash flow of companies. And I would like to again go to what has been raised this afternoon as well. Our SMEs have to invest at the moment heavily in the digital and green transition. And for this investment, they of course need resources, financial resources. And financial resources can be found in different occasions. The company can have equity and or reserves built up, and they can use those resources. Unfortunately, during the pandemic and also last year with the energy crisis, many of our companies had to use their reserves and often even their personal savings to keep their company afloat. So that financial resources have already been used up in many occasions. A second option would be bank lending, and we have seen in the past year with the inflation that interest rates are going up again, especially for working capital lending. And that is where the late payment comes in and where the directive should take a broader stance. If we see, and that's what the GRC study clearly showed, if we see that cash flow can go up with almost 66% if a payment is made within 30 to 60 days, then I think it's clear that by tackling and putting clear caps on payment terms, there can be a lot done for SMEs' access to finance. Because with having invoices paid in time, the working capital of those SMEs goes up, cash flow goes up, and that will allow them, instead of go to banks and lend for working capital, to go to a bank and lend for investments. On top of that, I don't know whether you've already tried to get lending at the moment for working capital, but the interest rates are really horrifically high at the moment. So if we can make sure that our SMEs can tap into the payment of their invoices for the work and services that they have been doing, then of course that's a huge step forward. And that's a bit what I would like to summarize also with the SME United position on this topic. We want to have clear caps, 30 or 60 days, for payment, business to business and business to government. Of course, we are open to take into account sectoral practices that have been in place for years, taking into account, of course, that all parties agree to those practices. And we want to make sure that in that way, our SMEs get their products and services paid in a decent and fair period to make sure that they can invest that money in developing their company to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronique, and thank you for the support of SME United in this file, especially in this last month. It has been last month and years, last month for the review, but in the last years, we have been working intensively on this issue as well.
Rosa, if I may, maybe, because it's the last month, but I'm now looking at my colleague who has been working on this file for 20 years. And I would like to grant him to conclude this topic where he has been working and investing on for so long. So thank you, Luc.
Yeah. Yes, a warm thanks from all the organizers on our side. It has been a very intense, but also a very good cooperation with SME United. So warm thanks to all of you. So now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Pietro Dell'Otto. Mr. Pietro Dell'Otto is a member of the Economic and Social Committee. He's member of the Group 1, the Group Employers. He's president of the Consultative Commission on Industrial Change and was a spokesperson for the category of crafts and small and medium-sized enterprises. So also a warm welcome, Mr. Dell'Otto. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm delighted to be here. It's so difficult to close an event. I'm so sorry. I apologize for that because I had another 3 meetings in the afternoon. But it's absolutely important to be here because we have not to celebrate it, but we are making a step ahead on the process to put in the spotlight SMEs. Since I'm here since 2010, I had the privilege to have the role that now is from Mira Maria as spokesperson of the category SMEs category. And I don't want to enter in the detail about the directive, but generally speaking, to talk what we are doing. What we are doing together, I would say, because I perfectly remember when I arrived here in 2010, but I remember also before with another hat, many hats, dealing the same thing. We are working together as Group 1 with SME United because we are so close. We built a very fruitful and positive cooperation. And I would say I'm really proud because it was roughly at that moment, that period, that we enclosed structurally SME United in the Group 1 stakeholder forum. Was not granted for free. It was not granted at all. But for the daily work of all organizations belonging to the SME United, and for the heavy work done by SME United, and of course our daily push to have SME United on board. If you remember that time, there were not so many dossiers, including SMEs, in the legislative work coming from the Commission. From the Commission, since then, I would say, after so many, I would say not daily for me, but monthly, weekly, monthly, meeting with commissioners, with commissioner officers, with other distinguished representatives of the Commission, that SMEs started in a structural way, day by day, to be included in all files. From space dossiers dealing with space, to defense, to any other. There is a chapter on SMEs. We can celebrate it. I used to say, I'm happy but not satisfied. I'm always happy, but not satisfied because we can improve, and we have to. I remember the Small Business Act, everything we did. I remember when it just arrived here in this house, in the plenary, in 2010. I'm so proud about that because I'm the father of the principle, of the one in, one out principle. After 12 years, I've been included in the legislative work in the better regulation package. But I'm so proud because it was my amendment in the plenary to include this principle for SMEs. I have to celebrate? No, we can be better. What I'm saying that roughly all dossiers we are handling now are connected with some pillars already existing. Access to funding, to credits, Payment, do you remember the Tajani work about this directive? The possibility to have recognized and acknowledged the work done in SMEs, in innovation, in research, in innovation, in a different form of research, but in absolutely true and transparent and immediately perceived innovation process. Was not clear at that time. We can be better. We can be better in considering that 96-98% of our companies that we are so privileged to represent, not as an exemption of the EU legislation, but the core of the legislation. Considering the European champions that we need, of course, larger companies, as not the exemption, but another word. Connected, of course, but we need to consider SMEs finally as the core of the EU legislation, not the exemption. And we can be better and better on this file. It's not a 100-meter run, it's a marathon. But when we consider, we have a lot of administrative burden on the SME's shoulders. Oh, come on. We are the first on the ground that we claim we are so specific. We need a very focused territorial attention to SMEs. And we create, in the last decades, not 27 legislation on SMEs, but we created hundreds of conflicting policies on SMEs, European, national, regional, local, and sometimes conflict each other. The golden plating, we are complaining about the golden plating, we are the first, because we were shaking the subsidiarity principle as a flag. Probably the time not to abandon, but to adopt this principle in order to clean up the burden of legislation totally conflicting, useless for our SMEs, I think is the next border we have to cross in the future. And finally, because I don't want, otherwise, I'm not running for the next election, so I'm not talking like a politician, but in this house, we are absolutely focused on my present commitment, my present role. In the last 2.5 years, now re-elected, I'm the president of Industrial Change. Industrial change, it means which trends, all trends, the mega trends affecting all our companies, including SMEs. And I'm trying, and we are dealing, managing in order to include our SMEs in our main focus for the energy and environmental issues and transformation, the digital transformation, but also in the framework, of course, of the global competitiveness. But when we discuss about that, because my commission, my section, is a specialized section, it's not unusual, it's the seventh specialized session of this House, we are not working just by treaty ex post, but also ex ante, in order to anticipate work. We are doing this in this way with, for example, some specific new files, artificial intelligence and metaverse, in ex ante, before the Commission deliver his communication or package, or water. We are opening, we are, as you see now, we launched the exercise to call EU Blue Deal. Blue Deal, it means water, the next golden asset we need to preserve. Water. And really, to conclude, I would like to deliver this message. To do that, we are trying to not soon to search new answers to all the same questions: how to access funding, how to access credit, how to simplify the burden. We need to raise new questions. This is the point. This is the real point. And we are here in this house absolutely focused in order to do that. So, dear friends, dear distinguished colleagues, let me greet as well Luke Hendrik, because he's not just one of the pillar of SME United, but also my new colleague in few months, I think. Few months? Maybe 2 months? I don't know, replacing a colleague be retired. So welcome on board also here. And thank you so much for having me. Thank you for listening to me, and all the best, my friends and my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Dell'Otto. Thank you for your commitment and your work on SMEs. We are very happy to count with your support, and also with Mira Maria and soon with Luke in this house. And now, to close the event, I would like, on behalf of all the organizers, Confartigianato, Spanish Plataforma Against Late Payments, and Pimec, we would like to thank all of you, those present in the room and those joining us online, for your participation, for your patience during these 3 hot hours in the room. And we hope that all that has been discussed here can be taken into account by the European institutions, the Comitè Econòmic and Social, and also by the Commission and the European Parliament and Council. But we will continue after the summer break with a renewed energy to lobby for the interest of SMEs, to ensure that the late payments legislative procedure is taking into account the difficulties that SMEs face, and it's reflected in the law, in order to try to solve this problem that we have raised here, that it's quite general across Europe. So thank you very much, and we wish you a happy holidays and a happy summer. Thank you.